November 1st, 2010 Planning Commission meeting. First on our agenda is the minutes of October 4th, 2010. Everyone on the commission's received a copy of them. They're attached to the agenda. Are there any comments, changes, questions about the minutes? There being none.
I move that they be accepted.
A second? We have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Next on the agenda is a presentation from the Radnor Conservancy. With us is Leslie Bowes, the Executive Director. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank you for getting us on the agenda so promptly. And thank you all for your service. This is just a save the date and an invitation to a program that is being put on by the EAC, the League of Women Voters, and the Radnor Conservancy as a joint effort. It's another in the sustainability series. This program is going to happen on November the 29th in this room. It's the Monday after Thanksgiving. And the program is entitled Conservation Development, Uniting Growth and Preservation. And it's intended to kickstart the conversation about how we as a community want to see future growth occur, how we want to see it take shape in the community. It's no secret that we have, relatively older ordinances for planning purposes, and that there's relatively little open space left. And it would be naive to think that we're going to preserve all of that open space, much as obviously the Conservancy would love to do so. But it is going to be developed, and the question is, how is it going to be developed? And all of that is going to be driven by our zoning ordinances, which, also have the benefit of being able to, if you adopt different ordinances, and you can diversify your housing stock. So there are plenty of benefits to talking about this. This program is not intended to answer the question at all, but it is going to look at the various types of ordinances that have been used successfully in the past, and lay out examples of where they've been used. We're going to have, I wished we had a flyer done. We're sort of still juggling the speakers. It's a work in progress. But we have 3 speakers for sure. Ann Hutchinson from the Natural Lands Trust is going to come, and she's going to discuss, various options for conservation development. And you guys may be familiar with this, but it's a perpetually updated, always new, innovative field, and there may be some new innovations that you may not have heard about yet. We're going to have Chip Vaughn come and talk about a development that he just did just down in Rose Valley. It's called Traymore, and it was done using one of the models that was designed by Natural Lands Trust. They were able to preserve a lot of open space and develop the property in a really tasteful way, diversifying the municipality's housing stock and preserving a really significant historic home as well. So he's going to talk about how that all worked out. And we're also going to have Jim Wendelgass, who is the Township Manager for West Vincent Township. He served for a decade on their Planning Commission and is now the Township Manager. And West Vincent was one of the first municipalities to adopt some of these ordinances. So he's seen a progression of how they've been used over the decades and how they've been updated and improved, and can also give a municipal perspective relating to, once you preserve the space, what do you do with it? So we're not quite finished with all the, details of the programming, but that gives you a good flavor. We think, as a group, the EAC, the Conservancy, and the League of Women Voters thinks this is a really important question for us to be addressing as a community. Before, obviously we can't wait much longer because the land will be developed by default the way it's always been developed in this township. We want to get all the stakeholders involved. We're going to be publicizing this to the citizenry, and hopefully somebody's watching and is going to pique their interest. We're also talking to and inviting the participation of the major landowners in the township, because obviously their participation is a critical element to getting a good ordinance. And we've got indications that they're going to be here to participate in the program. And also, we really think it's really important that our municipal leaders come and participate, because the question's going to be left to you guys to make the final vote as to how this all happens. And again, this is not it's not a debate, and it's not going to answer any questions, but it's just in an hour and a half, you guys can come and get a little primer of what's the current state of options relating to conservation development right now. So we hope you can make it, and I thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Leslie. I have a quick announcement to make before we go into the rest of the agenda. At the end of this year, John Ellinger and Matt Marshall's second terms expire on the Planning Commission, so they will be not able to be up for a renewal. So the Planning Commission will be looking for 2 applicants to fill the spots on the Planning Commission. Anyone interested in being on the Planning Commission in the Township should forward your resume and letter of intent onto our Township manager, they'll be making announcements at the Board of Commissioners meeting also, but I just want to let everyone know that. On with the agenda, next is subdivision 2010-S03 final. Dan, we have a letter from the applicant requesting an extension until our January meeting?
That's correct.
Okay, do we have a motion to accept the extension to the January meeting?
So moved.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Very good. Next on the agenda, I'm actually going to switch the agenda items with the permission of the 2 applicants. Next on the agenda, we're going to hear subdivision 2010-9-09, final of Village Associates LP to construct 3 additions to an existing building in areas currently impervious with construction less than 500 square feet, total at Spread Eagle Village, 503 West Lancaster Avenue. Are the applicants present?
Yes.
Good.
This is the village, the Eagle Village Shops. I can't get used to the new name, so bear with me. What we have along the bottom is Lancaster Avenue running in a generally east-west direction. Eagle Road is running along the right-hand side in north-south. And Old Eagle School Road is off to the west. The areas shown with the blue lines show the existing property lines. As you can see, there are 6 separate parcels that make up the entire site. And the building in the back is shown here that has the 3 small additions proposed out on the front. And just the speckling in the sidewalk shows how the sidewalk is being changed. It's the same, it's in the same general configuration. It's just being redone. Parking space is getting added or eliminated, and one's being added down further. So the Township Subdivision Advisory Committee met, and we had 13 comments concerning the plans. And if you prefer, I can run through them quickly.
Are there any major concerns that you have, Dan?
No, there are 3 small additions to the property. The only thing is there's a storm sewer running through the back that's not shown on the plans, and I'm looking for the applicant to identify how the water's getting transported to the stormwater management system. There is a staircase that's shown here that takes pedestrians out to Eagle Road that, I don't want to use the word dangerous, but it's certainly not in the greatest location. There's no access across the street. There is a little piece of a sidewalk, but it takes you right into the parking lot of the farmer's market. So it's something that I think needs to be addressed. And
Okay, well, with that, why don't we just hold questions for right now? Hear the applicant, and then we can go back and ask Dan or the applicant questions.
Good evening. I'm George Brosman. I represent the owner of the shopping center, which is Village Associates. Dan described the project, but from our perspective, you may know the Valley Forge Flower Shop, which is located in this building here. This project is being done so the Valley Forge Flower Shop can leave this small space that it has here, and it would occupy this building completely. That's where the salon is now, and there's an optical shop and a tanning salon, which would vacate the premises. There's 3 small additions being added, really mostly for architectural enhancement to the building, but to add a little additional space to make the building a little more prominent. I have a concept with me that Jeff Martin, the architect, prepared. Jeff is back there, along with Patrick Spellman from Yerkes and Donna Torpe from the manager of the shopping center. In addition, there's a little alley, I call it an alleyway, between the 2 buildings. That would be enhanced with pavers and become an attractive area where plants and things would be kept. As Dan mentioned, 1 space would be eliminated in the front. We could pick up 2 in the back by restriping the area in the front of that alley. Our plan had shown another parking space here. But we're thinking now we may not want to add that. There's a Japanese maple tree there that we're thinking would be better to be preserved. When the plans had been prepared initially, we were just trying to maximize the number of spaces that we could get. But since then, I had met with Matt Bauman, the zoning officer, and I have a determination from Matt that these 2 parcels are one for zoning purposes, and that there's more than enough parking here to support what we're doing, the addition that we're doing. So we don't really need to add that space, and we can save a tree there. Donna, the manager, was at the Shade Tree Commission, I believe it was last week, and got a favorable recommendation. There's a dogwood tree in the area of this one improvement, and I think we agreed that we would replace that tree somewhere on the site. This is the concept that Jeff Martin has put together. Eventually, we'd take this to the design review board. There's the 1 bump out, another bump out, and then a bay window. And then you can see the artistic version of the alleyway converted into kind of a nice planted area. For stormwater management, we have sort of a green concept that we would like to do. There's already a stormwater management system here, and even though we're building everything over impervious coverage, what little bit we're adding technically does require some additional stormwater management. The concept here is to put in a tank that would capture water from the roof, and that water would be used on a daily basis to water the flowers and the plants in the store. We think that's a very green solution. They're actually going to be doing some other green things they hope to be doing in connection with this project. For instance, they're thinking about doing geothermal heating for the site. So they would hold this out as really a green project, and it'll be a nice addition to the center.
Thank you. Anyone from the planning
Excuse
commission?
me, Mark, that was one of the comments that I had about, I have no issue with the tank and the system they're describing. My only concern is somehow I need assurance that the system's going to be pumped out and ready for the next rainstorm. So that's just some additional information that's needed.
Very good.
And we can provide that. We think we'll have some information for you on that, Dan.
Okay. Any questions from the planning commission?
Are these proposed changes in keeping with the current architectural style and motif of the center?
Jeff, do you want to answer that?
The color looks different. I don't know any maroon frontages there now.
Over the past, I'd say, year and a half, we've renovated several of the building facades changed some roofs, changed some stucco color, and brought the buildings along the lines to what we're doing here. With the renovation of this building, the two adjacent buildings will also be renovated so that this building will not be the only one with stone and kind of the vibrant colors. So this is a package deal of a renovation to this building, but 3 facade upgrades in total.
And Dan, this all goes before design review?
That's correct. That's one of the comments.
And what about the additional changes?
Well, I'm not aware of the other changes to the buildings, just what was submitted tonight.
There's no square foot change to the other buildings, only facade renovations, just to the skin.
Does design review have
They would-
jurisdiction over facade changes?
Yes, they do.
And those will go to design review.
All the changes will?
We were waiting until we were finished here to go to design review, just in case you have any comments that we need to incorporate with that.
Dan, you had mentioned in your notes that the site was in need of some handicap ramping. How many spots do you think that is?
I would say there's probably 4 or 5 that I had taken note of when I was out there.
Oh.
So there are some in some areas, but there were not any in this immediate area. So it is something that needs to be addressed. I don't know that it needs to be addressed with this work, but it is something that the site needs to address.
That does bring, I mean, I did notice that they're putting a curb cut, a ramp, curb cut in the front, but at the back of the thing where it goes to the parking lot in the rear, you didn't put a curb cut in there.
Where are you talking?
Between the two buildings towards the back line, right there, the curb cut. I was just wondering if that was on purpose or just an oversight. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name, sir.
I'm Jeffrey Martin from JTA Associates. That's an area where we do not want the public walking through. There's going to be a gate there, so when deliveries come for the garden center, that they can be brought in to that area, but we don't want the public walking back through that area. It's less of a monitored area at the back of the building.
There's no reason that someone who's mobility impaired would ever be back in that area, whether they were working there or not?
There should not be.
All right.
We don't want merchandise walking off.
I'm thinking more of accessibility, but we'll deal.
I had a quick question about the calculations, because at the top of the project description, it says that you propose to remove 957 square feet of impervious and add a total addition of 913. That's at the top of the page, but then the calculations on the chart indicate that you're only increasing by 474. So the two calculations didn't match up. Are you doing a net of 44 square feet, or is it this 471 with the lot and the building calculations?
Patrick, jump in
Because
if I'm
the
saying it
project
wrong.
description at the top
Yeah, I know.
doesn't match up number-wise to what you say you're doing.
Yeah, I read that. I think, and Patrick will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it may inartfully be stated that I think what it's talking about, there's building coverage, which are the bump outs. Those are the 474, as I understand. And then it's also talking about impervious areas that are being affected by the project. Over here in the chart, you'll actually see that even with adding this one additional space, we were a net reduction by about 4 square feet of impervious coverage on the whole. If we don't do that parking space, that'll be about another 200 square feet to the good on impervious coverage. So I think these are the numbers that are controlling. I believe those numbers were just talking about what's going to be affected.
That parking lot, that parking spot that you were considering adding and now you're not, that's an impervious island, or is that grass? What is that?
Presently, that's a part of this grass island,
Okay, that's a grass island.
and that this
Right.
plan had showed just taking a little chunk out of it
Sure.
to add that space, but we would now propose to just leave that because there was a tree in there.
And I'm thinking out loud here, so just follow me for a second. Mark, this is to you. Given that this is already non-conforming above whatever the 70%, this is such a small project, this isn't something where we would ask them to remove more impervious and get them down to what's the impervious maximum for this zoning, right?
I think they are removing some, as you say.
No,
you are
the
actually-
net's the same, it's still going to be 76 point whatever %, which is still, this non-conforming percent is still the same. I mean, granted, it's a minor thing, I just, when we have an opportunity to get impervious down. It's a very pretty design, don't get me wrong. The only other question I had was about that downspout detail on page 6, it looks like it connects to the underground tank that you're going to build. And unless I'm misreading it, it looks like there's going to be basically an overflow emergency access. I'm just thinking if we have a big snowstorm, big rainstorm, can water fill this tank? Dan, is it big enough that it's not going to fill during a rainstorm and just come pouring out of that spout? And if it does, what's it going right onto parking lot and then running down Conestoga? And, Wayne already has its water issues, so.
Yeah, there may be occasions where that either gets clogged or the tank does fill up and it does overflow. And that's the purpose of having it designed that way, so that the water has a way to get out and doesn't back up underground into a basement.
Okay.
So that's the purpose of having basically a relief valve.
So it's just kind of good faith or, whatever, goodwill that people keep those things well-maintained so that we don't have water pouring out. I mean, this will go right out of that parking lot down Conestoga, I would think.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
it will end up flowing if that is the situation. But
Okay.
that's one reason why I was looking for some additional information on the tank.
Right.
To make sure it stayed empty.
Okay. That's all I had, thank you.
Any other comments from the planning commission?
Yeah, I'd just like to hear your response to, I think, 3 of Dan's points on the memo. The first one being that consideration should be given to consolidating the parcels.
Yeah, with regard to consolidating the parcels, that's something I spoke to the corporate counsel for the Village Associates. That's something they've considered in the past. It's a fairly complicated matter. We don't think it's warranted for this project. It is something they would consider in the future. My research at the zoning records showed that even though these 2 parcels may have a separate legal description from the township's point of view, they were merged in 1991. That's why this Z is here, because these 2 buildings were built over the property line, so that they are considered one. As far as the other ones, there's many other parcels there, and we don't know what merging them or not merging them might mean at this point as far as mortgages and zoning compliance and things like that. So it is something they would consider in the future, but we'd ask not to do it for this minor project.
Okay. And number 10, confirm the necessity. Dan had mentioned the stairs leading down to Eagle Road that he thinks might create an unsafe situation.
Yeah, those stairs, we were just talking with the maintenance person at the shops who's been there at least 25 years. He believes those stairs, which are right here, have been there basically since the time that these 3 buildings were built around 1991. We didn't have a record of how they got installed, but they have been there a long time, and he observes that people do use them, as far as we know, without incident. They do connect to a sidewalk that we have here, and he does see people going back and forth between the 2 parcels. This is where the farmer's market is, and there are other shops up here. People who know the area would also know that there's a set of steps that go from the farmer's market parcel up to the Stratford offices. A lot of times when I go to the farmer's market on the weekend, I'll park back here and walk down these steps. So we think there's some continuity there between that system. We would prefer just to leave those there. They've been there a long time. I walked across there a couple times in preparation for this, and I grant that it's not the way you would design it, but it seems to work. You can see ample distance each way, and people seem to be using it. So we're happy with the way it is. We're not aware of any problems, and we'd just like to keep it the way it is.
Dan, are you suggesting there's a safer way for them to be crossing that road? Are you aware of is there, I don't know the road well enough myself, but is there a safer spot where we should be directing pedestrian crossings?
Well, I've never seen anybody use the stairs, but granted, I'm not there that often. It's a mid-block crossing, which is not the most ideal situation. Crossing at the intersection is it my standard answer, but we know that won't happen.
Sure.
That's too far for anybody. No one's going to walk to the intersection to cross and then come back up. I think it's something that does need to be explored. I don't know what the site distance is like coming from the farmer's market to the Eagle Village, because you have to look behind you back towards Lancaster Avenue. So I do agree, coming from Eagle Village to the farmer's market, there is plenty of site distance. I'm not convinced the opposite direction is the same distance and the same. I think we need to spend a little more time talking about that. Not that we need to hold the project up.
Sure.
But I do have a concern about it.
Well, you wrote it down as a concern, so I wanted to make sure we considered it. Yeah. And then again, the need to improve accessibility throughout the site. Do you have any long-range plans for that?
Yeah, and I could have Jeff Martin comment on it. I believe
Yes.
this is like a heads up from Dan, but they have done that each time that they've worked on an area of the center. They've tried to improve the handicap ramps where they could, and they intend to do that as they go forward. So, we don't have any problem with that concept. We will do it on a site-by-site basis as the projects come up.
In terms of the staircases, have you thought about, as a township, would the township consider putting like a painted crosswalk there?
Well, it's a possibility. It is a state road, so we would need to get PennDOT's approval.
All right.
Again, it comes down to site distance. What's the line of sight in each direction?
All right.
Any other questions?
Is there a sidewalk on Eagle Road?
My knowledge is that there's one here that's up on the site, and it continues here. I don't believe it continues down here in front of the gas station. I'm not sure if there's one over here. I think there's a partial one on the farmer's market side.
Yeah, to my recollection, there's just some curbing over there. There is sidewalk as you get to Lancaster Avenue, but not up in that area.
Of course, the most dangerous place to cross is the entrance to the farmer's market.
Okay. Any public comment? Okay. You've seen the memo from Dan to your dated, what is this? October 27th, 2010, with the 13 items, George?
Yes.
Other than items 4, 10, and 11, at this point in time, your applicant has agreed to comply with?
That's right.
Okay. 4 being what we just discussed about the consolidation, 10 being the steps, and 11 being the handicap ramps.
Correct.
Okay. Any further comments, questions from the commission? I personally would like to actually, at this point in time, I understand the consolidation and that there might be different mortgage issues regarding that, and I think that that's something that definitely should be addressed, that this site, the shopping center, should be combined into one at some point in time. I do think that the stairs leading to Eagle Road is definitely an issue, and I do, in our recommendation to the commissioners, that should be further explored with the township and further discussions between the applicant and the township. I just don't like stairs. I know Eagle Road, and I know that bend right there, and it's not a really safe bend, and to just put people out there, it's not a good thing, but I don't think we should hold up this minor application for that. The one thing that I would like to see, at least for this application, is the handicap ramps be resolved as to the lot that we are now looking at, being the combined lot that this portion of the center is on, that we have jurisdiction over for this saldo. I like to see conformity with the handicap ramps. Other than that, any other comments? we have a motion from Planning Commission?
I make a motion, we approve it as you modified.
Okay.
Second.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is SD 2010-D8, preliminary of Eastern University, construct a new 39,570 square foot student unit center building with a footprint of 17,844 square feet in the middle of the campus, which also includes pedestrian paths and a driveway to the proposed loading dock at 1300 Eagle Road. This application was before us at our last meeting. They resubmitted their plans with some additional information on October 18th and are now before us now. With that in mind, Dan, where are we timing-wise with this?
This needs your recommendation in order to proceed and meet the 90-day deadline. You need to recommend one way or the other tonight.
Okay.
Or the applicant has to submit.
Is there a provision in our saldo that upon a resubmission, it restarts the clock,
No.
to your knowledge? Mr. Rice?
Let me find the provision.
It's not a new application, so if it was a new application, the clock would start.
Okay.
There's a provision in here, and I haven't marked it, but there's a provision in here that seems to say when there's a resubmission, the clock restarts again, which I don't think is what the law is. The law is from the application, from the meeting, next following an application. This was filed September 13th, which means the 90 days would have run from October 4th, your meeting, next filing the application. That's 90 days. So that's October, November, December, January.
So we have January 4th to act, well, the commissioners
That's your 90, right. The commissioners would have not until then to act on this. The restarting the clock, there is a provision in here, and I'll find it in a minute, but I read it this afternoon, and I don't think that that's what Section 508 of the MPC contemplates.
Okay, so you're,
But you're okay with the 90 days running from October 4th,
okay,
or the commissioners are. They'll make the decision ultimately.
very good.
Well, it's my understanding that the commissioners have to move by December 11th. I mean, that's the way we calculated the date.
Okay.
So, I mean,
Yeah,
you see what you can find, but I have a different number.
Okay, but it's 90 days from October 4th.
Well, they looked at this last month, so this is the second time they're seeing it.
But it's only one application. So if the application comes in on September 13th, which is what I have, and I think it's on your memo, then the 90 days starts at the meeting next following the body that reviews the application, which is the Planning Commission, which is October 4th. So you start the 90 days from October 4th. That's your clock. I don't know what the December date is, but that's the clock for a decision on this preliminary plan.
Okay. With that, Dan?
Okay, this, just to give you where we are, the plan has changed since last month, but just to go over where we are on the site, we have Eagle Road running across the top, King of Prussia Road running north-south direction along the right-hand side, and Fenimore Woods, Cabrini College is up here. The areas shown in green and purple are the areas that are under discussion tonight. At the last month's meeting, the area up here, which is the Eagle Learning Center, was not incorporated into the program. The green area shown here in the lower center of the campus is the proposed student union. The pinkish purplish colors are the new impervious materials, driveways, walkways surrounding the building. One of the comments at last month had to do with parking requirements. So the applicant has come back and has expanded the parking lot up here at the Eagle Learning Center to make up for some of the loss in parking that they accommodated us in the large parking lot out front. I have a blow-up of that. So if you recall, we had a discussion about the parking and the parking requirements and trying to do something with the large parking lot that is in front of the McGinnis Learning Center and the Warner Library. So they have come back and they moved the building slightly because of the floodplain conversation. And then there are a number of islands that they've installed to accommodate some of the concerns we had, because this parking lot was such a large area of blacktop, and also try to help identify which way traffic should flow. So they added the arrows that are actually painted in the road. They put them on the plan. So there were 9 comments from
Dan, do you have a blow-up of the new proposed parking area?
Yes. So again, here we have Eagle Road running across the top of the plan, King of Prussia Road. The actual Eagle Learning Center is here, and the dormitory that was constructed a couple of years ago, both buildings at the same time, are shown here. And the parking lot currently ends in a cul-de-sac in this area, and they're proposing to move it and expand it. And this was shown on the previous plan from 2008, and at that time, the university agreed to shrink the parking lot slightly, knowing that this could be expanded in the future.
Did they get approval to build a larger lot?
No, the approval was for the smaller lot. So they need your approval for this larger lot tonight.
Now, this, when I counted it this afternoon, there are like 35 spaces in this thing, and there were 4 before, is that correct? So it's a net increase of 31? Is that about right?
That's about right. I'd have to check the numbers.
Does the other parking lot lose any spaces because of the islands?
Yes. The one by the building?
Yeah.
Yes.
How many?
Was it 9?
So we're getting something like a net increase of 22 or 23 spaces on the campus. Is that correct? I'm just pulling numbers out of the air.
Yes.
That's good.
There's a loss of 10 spaces there. So item number 1 refers to the zoning schedule on sheet 2 of 24, where we're looking, there's a couple of notations where it's not applicable. We are looking for that information to be included. The second item is apply for an NPDES permit. It's my understanding they have done that. They have not gotten the approvals back from the Delaware County Conservation District. And as you know, that's required when there's more than 1 acre of land being disturbed. Number 3 is to comply with the Shade Tree Commission's recommendation. Item number 4, identify the size of the new parking space dimensions in the proposed parking lot at the Eagle Learning Center. I had a couple of questions. They did give me some revised information on the stormwater calculations. I still had some concerns, and I needed some additional information, and one of those is for them to supply the perk tests. And they made some assumptions that were more conservative than what the ordinance calls for, but at the same time, they were using some of the crushed stone under the system in their calculations. So I'm looking for them to show me the numbers both ways, not showing us the property as meadow and eliminating the stone, to see what numbers give us the most conservative results.
Okay. Does anyone on the commission have the questions for Dan regarding his memo and the comments of the 5 comments within his memo?
I did have one thing that John Rice and I talked about that I missed, was about the transportation impact study.
Yeah.
So that's something that needs to be addressed that I did not include in my memo.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions. Actually, Dan, the only other thing I had is I didn't see a notation on any of the plans that the November 2009 floodplain lines are what is in fact on these new plans. We had the conversation last month, they were using the old floodplains.
That's right.
I didn't see a specific notation on the new plans that they're using the November 2009. Do you know if that's the case or not?
I honestly don't know, but
Okay,
the applicant's engineer is here, and she will know.
okay.
She did give me a plan showing the 93 lines with the 2009 lines and showing the difference, but she will be able to confirm.
Were there
what lines were
significant
shown.
changes? I mean,
Oh, yes. No, there's changes.
okay. Is that what made the building move?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Have we, the township adopted the 2009 versus the whatever previous one was?
That was adopted at the last commissioners' meeting.
Okay, well,
Dan, with regard to the stormwater management system that's been designed, you've gotten additional information. In your thought, how complete is the design of that system at this point in time?
I think it's very close. They just need to provide perk tests, and the perk tests are going to tell me if the groundwater infiltration rate is meeting the ordinance. And the worst thing that will happen is they have to make the system larger so that there's a larger footprint, so there's more area that will percolate, or the system has to be relocated to another point in campus that's higher in elevation and has better perk.
Okay, okay. Any other questions for Dan?
maybe I missed it. The number 7, all the walls longer than 4 feet must be designed to stand over topping? What do you mean? What's that mean?
Just that they have to be designed so that I know the earth is not going to push them over. So they have to show me some calculations showing how they're holding the walls up, whether it's a large footing or tiebacks.
Mark, I do have one, we're going to ask Dan questions about parking or the engineer?
No, why don't we limit questions to
okay,
Dan
that's what I
regarding his
thought.
memo,
All right,
and then we're
great.
going to have the college come up and, university, excuse me, come up and answer questions.
All right.
Okay, very good. Why don't we hear from the applicant? Nick?
Sure.
Can you just start with just really quickly, you heard the discussion between the timetable. What is your,
I haven't really looked at it. At the conclusion of hearing everybody, see
Very
where
good.
we want to go with it. I mean, Mark,
Mhm.
We'll see where it is, when we're done with it. Probably the only thing that I would want to mention is the parking. Remember, that was a result of the last meeting and making some islands in the current parking lot because of the sea of asphalt. And that's why we had no intent really to add this additional parking, but the impression we got from the board is that they wished additional parking to be added, and that's where that came from. So, that's why it appears now on this plan. The stormwater items, remember too, this is a preliminary plan, so final plan will address a lot of the stormwater issues that would be before the board. Anything beside that, I'm open to your questions.
Could you just go over for me the heights of the building from the,
Yeah, they comply. I assume they're, Karen, they're 3-story, no more than 38 feet?
but isn't the building quite a bit higher on one side than the other?
Yeah, 2 stories in the front and 3 on the back. Yeah, and the way the code reads is your average grade around the building. But it's still, less than 3, I believe.
Regarding the parking, I don't remember all of the discussion, but if you did not include the new parking near Eagle Road, do you have enough parking to comply with the overall requirements for the campus?
Right, no, that's why we added it.
No?
No, that is correct. We do not, and that's why we added additional spaces. Now, I say no, and it has to be a qualified no, unfortunately, because the Radnor Township zoning code, when it deals with institutions, if you read the parking ordinance, it really has nothing that's applicable to institutions. It talks about dormitories, and that's easy to figure out, what the dormitories are. But it says nothing about classroom space, number of students, number of faculty, anything that you would think would be determinative of parking. It talks about size of buildings, size of office buildings, and based their counts on that. So we came up, our count is based on what we could determine from the code in a conservative manner. We gave every benefit to the code and to a strict interpretation, saying that if we needed more parking, we provided more parking. Those numbers came in very close, but with this new building, we had to add additional parking. And in order to comply with what we calculated from the code, the best we could calculate from that code, we had to add the more parking spaces to comply.
Did we have a discussion last time, Dan and others on the commission, about whether the parking regulations apply to particular buildings or on an aggregate basis? I thought we did.
We did it on an aggregate basis. I mean, we did each particular building, we calculated, and then added them all up. That's how we reached at that determination.
How many parking spaces would be required for this building alone? Does anybody know? There was a
Yeah, it'd be more
count
than,
done.
I believe it's more than what is being provided here. 45, they said.
45.
45. So we were over by 20-some spaces before the construction of this building.
I'm sorry, you were over on the parking?
We were over by 20-some spaces before the construction of this building.
So you have to-
Over, meaning we had more parking spaces than required. The construction of this building required us to add the additional spaces.
How many parking spaces are in this central parking lot on the map?
Currently or now?
Proposed.
Proposed. Do you have that, Karen? Yeah, do you have that?
Do you need to, well, all right, let me ask another question. You can see where I'm going. There appear to be three major buildings fronting on this parking lot, or stated another way, three major buildings, maybe some in the back, that would be utilized where persons utilizing that building, those buildings would park.
Mhm.
If you take the aggregate dimensions of those buildings for parking space calculations and compared it to the number of spots in this parking lot, would you have enough parking spaces?
I'd ask Karen to look at the calculations. Now remember, though, John, you're talking about the entire site is when you do the calculation. The code talks about the entire site, but I understand where you're coming from with the question.
Well,
Nick,
well,
could you
that's being done. You have enough parking now up at the Eagle Learning Center, don't you? For the Eagle Learning Center?
Remember, I don't know if we calculated it that way. It's calculated as a site as a whole because you have certain people park in certain areas, when they come into the school. Again, we'd have to calculate, was it the Eagle Learning Center to see if there's enough spaces in that lot for the Eagle Learning Center.
All right. Maybe there's no quick answer to my question, but you can see where I'm going.
Yeah, I understand. But remember, too, as I said, the code is the lot as a whole. But you're looking at specific uses, specific buildings, and in that location, how many parking spaces are provided for that building.
I don't mean to hold everything up if we have to do a lot of calculations, but
Could you introduce yourself? I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Karen McManuel. Introduce yourself.
Karen McManuel's from Associated Engineering Consultants.
Thank you.
Currently, I just want to go back to the parking study, and that was done, and the numbers again, just to present them to the board. We did do a complete parking study, breaking down every single building, the square footages and the takeoff per the code and what the code has right now. And the summary is the current campus requirements is 1,023 spaces. And the current campus spaces they have is 1,082. So we are over the requirement that's required by code.
Now, remember, too, this is just on this site. We're not
Yes.
talking about West Campus or South Campus or whatever that other site is.
So the number of parkings that's required for the student center is 46. So with that, where's my numbers here?
How about for those other two buildings that are there? What are the requirements for the other two buildings?
The library right now is 36 spaces, and McGinnis Hall is 32 spaces.
32, 36,
So-
46.
With that's 113 spaces required for those three buildings. That parking lot that's immediately out front has 88, but you also have parking in a big lot that goes off to the east side of McGinnis.
Here.
That's right adjacent to McGinnis.
Well, I have a question about the size of that parking lot. Because I read in our saldo that we shouldn't even have a parking lot that exceeds 30 cars in capacity without it being physically separated from one another by 10-foot wide planting strips and concrete curbs. So how did this parking lot get to be so big to begin with how did it get to be a big, this was built what year? This parking lot right near McGinnis?
I can actually jump in there. That parking lot, I used to, as a teenager,
Oh, it's that
be on
old.
this.
No, no. Mark, I so apologize. I'm quite sure I'm much older than you, but I meant since 1993. So prior to 1993, when that was updated in our
Yeah,
saldo.
I'm going to say prior to 1981, that parking lot's been in existence, and that's when
Okay.
I was in high school.
Got
I was
it.
gonna say, I believe we have photographs back to 1970. It's been there before 1974. I think we have photographs. So it's
But-
been there a long time.
But maybe that's what you were referencing last month, Mark, when you said, this is a big scope. Maybe we should be bringing these these big, vast parking lots into current. Now I'm following you. Got it. Thank you.
I
So with
didn't
the
follow
parking numbers.
I didn't follow your first set of numbers.
Okay.
I thought you said that currently,
The campus requires 1,023 spaces.
and you have
We have
1,000.
1,082.
Well, that's a delta of 61, right?
Right, we have more. So with the addition of the student center, we require 46 spaces.
So you're still
we're
ahead of
still
the-
at a plus.
Right?
However, with the design and with coming back and putting in the islands and with the design, we are, the area right here, we're widening the pedestrian pathway and making sure that the cars and the parking are outside of that. So we're losing 23 spaces between the islands and the design of the pedestrian walkway. So we do need cars out front. Plus, in rearranging that parking lot, we lose the 4 spaces that are there. So right now, we are at a plus 23, because required by code, we need 1,069, and the campus is going to have right now 1,092. So we are still at a plus 23 spaces.
That includes the new proposed parking at Eagle, right?
Yes. With the new proposed parking at the Eagle, correct. We're at a plus 23.
And the excess again will be how much, as now proposed? Final number?
23,
23 excess?
yes.
And how many do you have proposed up at Eagle?
37.
So 23 of those 37 are not actually required.
Correct.
Can you put up the a plan of the whole campus? And can you briefly discuss the current traffic flow? I know that I was on the Planning Commission when we did the Eagle Road addition or development. And at that point in time, we had a lot of neighbors from Fairview and Fenimore, and there was going to be some blockage so that those very minor arteries were insulated from traffic. And I jog by your area, and I always try to figure out what is to keep my youth down.
Right now, the main entrance into the campus comes off of Eagle Road. The main drive comes into campus, and you drive through campus this way and around. when we did the development for the Eagle Learning Center and the dorms, at that time, this road continued through the campus and went out onto Fairview. And at that time, we agreed to close that off. So there are bollards at the end, so you cannot come in and out of the campus there. So all the main traffic comes in and out Eagle Road. They can come down, and there's a parking lot down here that was added for them to turn around and come back through the campus. There is a parking lot near the gym that does come off Fairview. We have that access, and then there's a couple maintenance building down in the south corner here that does have an access one way out.
So for the students to really access the different student amenities other than the gymnasium and the sports complexes, they're really entering off of Eagle Road and exiting off of Eagle Road.
Yes.
Remember, too, there is an entrance. For
Yeah, and
For the
that's pretty,
dorms,
that's,
yeah, for the dorms.
okay, okay.
No, not to the dorm.
On Doan.
Oh, for Doan, I'm sorry, Ms. Negro, for Doan's dorm, yes.
Okay.
But you can't get through, if you're trying to come through campus,
Right.
you can't go through that.
That only accesses that dorm.
One of the things I'm struggling with this parking study is that, I can read our code and I can count up I actually think the code's clear enough, for parking spaces for 40 square feet of floor space, or a spot for every 150 feet of floor area, one space per 3 residents. Not knowing your campus intimately, I wouldn't know what Warner Hall versus Workman Hall versus the uses for these are to be able to calculate how many spaces you're supposed to have. And intuitively, I see the numbers. I mean, I still would, it's a little hard for me to follow because there are some specific calculations in the zoning based on the use. And the one thing I don't specifically see addressed here is is any parking spaces for the turf field that you have. But maybe they're here and I'm just not seeing it. Maybe the field has a name. But intuitively, what I'm struggling with is that if you've had all these sufficient parking spaces, why anecdotally are we hearing about kids parking all over the area and parking down in that other lot that I understand, isn't calculated into these calculations for tonight's purposes, but intuitively it doesn't seem right to me that if you have all sufficient parking, why is there such a parking issue in this area? And so there's a disconnect for me that I'm really struggling to understand. And maybe the disconnect is that you really have far more commuter students and that our parking regulations are not adequately accounting for commuter students in the zoning. We're counting on residential students, and the 2 or 3 institutions in the township, maybe they have far more commuters, and that's the bigger impact, and that's the disconnect between what we hear anecdotally and numbers. I can see your numbers tonight. I understand them. To the extent that I know what some of these buildings are. So I'm struggling with that.
Well, is it fair to say that every higher education struggles with parking? I've heard of a major university that somebody asked one of the trustees, what do you discuss at your meetings? And they said parking. It was major university. And that there's always a disconnect between the minimum number required by a particular code and the optimum number if you ask the students. Isn't that the case? We should recognize that?
Yeah, I guess, just using, the largest university in our community is Villanova. And I know during the basketball games, obviously, there's all kinds of traffic patterns and things of that nature, regarding it, but they seem to park everyone in the lot. It's a hard calculation to come up with, as to this whole parking.
Well, I'm just talking about practice. I
Yeah.
can't imagine that any university could ever have enough parking in a realistic sense.
And the beauty of the university is they want green space also.
Sure.
They want open space and green space, and so that's kind of the problem here. And again, Mr. Rice and I have talked about this parking code, and at some point, I think something's going to have to be done about it, but.
Can I ask a question about the parking at Eagle Learning Center? Is that contemplated to be it's a 60-foot setback from Eagle Road, and then the parking lot will begin? The new parking?
Yes. The 60-foot right-of-way, we're actually off the 60-foot right-of-way slightly by a couple of feet. And then on the east side, there's a 200-foot setback from King of Prussia Road that we're outside of.
We know what happened to the setback off of King of Prussia Road, but the last time that this application had come through with Eagle Learning Center, I remember the big debate by this board was that if you continue to expand on that corner, it's going to obviously create some issues as it relates to the traffic that flows from Eagle off of King of Prussia into the site. And I can remember that we had the discussion about moving some of that parking to the interior of the campus. I even suggested that I thought it was appropriate to look at decked or structured parking on the interior of your campus, and I think that was something that actually everybody thought might work at some point in time. Was that ever given consideration?
It was consideration. Even at that time, we had looked at putting some of the parking underneath the building. However, that just became cost prohibitive, and construction with that. We did end up putting parking to the west. This starts the parking lot that was done at the time. You don't show it completely. This plan here shows the parking that was added at that time.
Well, I guess my point is that when we had the application before us for the Eagle Learning Center, every consideration was given to how to lessen the impact on that corner, which had been before a wooded area, which is now not wooded. You're talking about bringing another 37 parking spaces to that corner, which will, I believe, lessen the setback probably by at least 40 or 50 feet. You're creating more traffic at an intersection that's already essentially over its allotment in terms of how the traffic flows. I think it's deserving to see at least some consideration of deck parking in the interior of the campus. And I know you said it's cost prohibitive, but it's starting to become cost prohibitive for the township to continue to incur, the impact on the roads, and particularly that road. It's highly traversed. There's a lot of students, and I think it just has gotten to a point where you've kind of maxed out that corner of the campus.
Although no matter where we put that parking, they're still going to come through that same entrance.
I agree.
Whether we put it in the middle of campus or there, they're still going to enter that way.
I agree. I just think it lessens the impact on the surrounding neighborhood if you put it in the interior of the campus versus right on the corner, which is where we were 3 or 4 years ago.
I understand. And it is compliant with code, but I understand your position.
My question about the floodplain before, is the new floodplain lines on this are the November 2009? There was no notation on the paperwork.
They are the November 2009. I will add that we did put in November 2009 floodplain map, even though we were not required to, because actually we were under the 1983 map according to code when this plan was submitted. But again, to be compliant, we put it under 2009. As Dan mentioned, that modification was made after this plan was submitted, but we still put in the 2009.
Did it have an impact on the wetlands?
No, it did not.
Okay.
Any other questions? When was on the last development, the Eagle Learning Center, when was that actually done? What year was that? When was that before us?
It's, I believe it opened in 2007.
2007, so it
Yeah,
was
the
before us.
construction was completed.
It was before us in 2005, 2006?
06, yeah, I think we started in 05. I think our submission was 05, and I think it was approved in 06.
Okay, at that point-
Construction started that summer of 06.
Okay. I believe there was a traffic impact study filed in conjunction with that application.
I believe so, but
Okay,
I would
but
need
it
to
had
double
not
check.
been one with this application.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, is that a preliminary or final plan? John, do you know if that's a preliminary or final plan requirement, the traffic impact?
Oh,
Prelimin-
I
it's
have that
Preliminary.
note.
It is preliminary.
Yes. That was one of my notes tonight, is that it says transportation study for all preliminary plan for institutions.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, we'll open it up to public comment. When you approach, please state your name and address.
You can sit down. You can go.
Good evening, Andrew Packer, 27 Fairview Drive. What I actually put before you tonight is what you guys were kind of just discussing, the traffic flow and parking. I live on Fairview Drive. It's right at the corner of where Fenimore and Fairview come together. And right now there's 2 bollards in place, as they mentioned, at the old gatehouse. That is right at that pink line right there. There's still an entrance, and I apologize for jumping in earlier, right there at Doan Hall, it is? Yes. That's a residence hall. There's also the entrance down here still to the parking lot in front of the gymnasium and turf fields. There's also an entrance up here. I'm not sure what the name of the hall. Odd Hall. And there's also a parking lot back up there, and the parking lot in front of the residence hall as is required. What I kind of propose, and I'm not sure if it's been proposed to Eastern before, but kind of providing some kind of inter-campus connection. Right now you have the residence halls up on Eagle Road. The only entrance to those are off of Eagle Road and not connected to the other part of campus except through a pedestrian walkway. The only other access to the turf field parking lot is through Fenimore or Fairview. The only entrance to the residence hall off of Fairview is through Fairview, in addition to Odd Hall. Cabrini at 9 p.m., I believe it is, shuts down all other entrances to campus besides the one off of Upper Gulf, except for emergency access vehicles. I believe both the police and Radnor Fire Department have gate opening devices in their vehicles that can open the gates on Eagle Road and King of Prussia Road. The bollards here on Fairview Drive, Radnor Fire Company, and I believe the police as well, have keys to those bollards as well. What I propose to all the people before me tonight is for you to ask them to consider some kind of inter-campus system to connect all their residence halls and kind of contain all their traffic to within campus. Obviously, I'm not opposed to them opening it up during large events, 1, 2, 3, 4 times a year. I'm not really against, having, traffic disperse many different ways to allow traffic to disperse at a, easier and much greater rate. 4 times a year is not going to kill everybody. The other thing with this, obviously, there are, maybe say 20, 30 cars that park in this parking lot up here every day. I wouldn't be opposed to some kind of gate there that those people could get in. What I kind of want to, get the opinion on is, creating a safer environment for the neighborhood and eliminating the student travel down those roads, the commuter traffic to the parking lots, to the turf fields, to the games. Not too long ago, Radnor Township put a no parking ordinance on Fairview Drive and Fenimore as well, I believe, which, on large events, we can call and have that removed. And, the 4 events a year, that's not going to kill us. It's the in and out everyday traffic of people traveling up and down at a high rate of speed on Fenimore, on Fairview. There's tons of people that walk up and down Shimoni to the St. David's train station, down Fairview, to the turf field, or to the academic buildings. So kind of looking at that.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Colleen Price, and I live at 352 Shimoni Road. I'm going to see if this works. I had a couple of questions, and the first is regarding the floodplain. I don't know if you can see this. This is something that I picked up from the township. And the floodplain area really, really expanded with the new floodplain map. And if you can see the red section in the middle here, I guess that's what the pointer's for. The red section in the middle here is what it used to be. And when you put...
Colleen, yeah, why don't you push it up a little bit?
Push it further towards us, closer to us.
Okay.
Yeah.
There you go, that's great,
Okay,
thanks.
there you go. So this red section here is what the floodplain used to be, and then all this blue area is what it expanded to. And I don't know how to read this thing, but it looks like this building's right on the perimeter of the floodplain. I know there was a meeting on Wednesday that Dan Malloy hosted because just a couple of blocks up Poplar Avenue, that whole area went underwater just a few weeks ago because of a lot of flooding. The tributaries that come to these ponds in this area on Eagle are Gulf Creek, and I forget the name of the other one, even though it runs right across my property. If there's all kinds of flooding up here, if you're going to be building in an area where pretty much that water discharges, I wonder what that impact is. And I don't, even pretend that I have any clue what that impact study should be, but I'm wondering if you have an environmental advisory board, maybe they should take a look at this and see what happens when you put a 40,000 square foot building right on the perimeter of a floodplain where we already know that there's a lot of flooding in that area. And I know that I live right across the street. I've had plenty of times where Shimoni Road is underwater because the ponds that are on the, I guess, right on this part of Eastern literally overflow back up and come across Shimoni Road. So that would be my first issue. I don't know if you can refer it to the Environmental Advisory Board. I don't even know if they review that, or someone who could look at what happens when you build right on a floodplain. My other issue is on the parking study. I'm looking at the parking study here, and it seems that they took all the square footages of the building, and then they just took an arbitrary, they took 20% off. They're only giving you a calculation based on 80%. I don't know where that comes from. I didn't see anything in the code that said it's net floor area. It says it's floor area. I would think that's the entire floor area. I don't know how you just take 20% off. And also when you go to the uses of the buildings, there are certain uses that require much more parking than what they use. Pretty much the standard, we don't know what it is, it's 1 per 1,000 is what they use for their parking calculations. If you look at their turf field and their athletic fields, even under that standard of 1 per 1,000, there are calculations that are required for an athletic field because that's a use. That is under the parking requirement. I think it's section 20. It's 280-103-20. Any building or use other than is specified above, there has to be at least one space per 1,000 square feet. Those athletic fields are used for Eastern. Spectators come. There's got to be an accounting for the spectators who show up at those events. There's no accounting in their parking study. And I know I happened to be driving by Eagle Road, and this was probably about a month ago. There was a game, they were playing Rowan University. They had absolutely no parking. They were at capacity. They were parking over at South Campus. The whole lot was full. The bus for the Rowan students parked right on Eagle Road. And you can see it on this picture here. It says Rowan University on the side of the, well, you can't see it that well there. It says Rowan University on the side. And then there were 3 cars right behind it on Eagle Road. So there is absolutely no parking when there's an athletic event. On top of that, that's just Eastern's athletic events. They lease out those fields to soccer clubs, field hockey clubs, and lacrosse clubs. My daughter played on Viper Field Hockey. It's a club team that is absolutely a recreational, outdoor commercial use. The parking changes. It's now 1 per 150 square feet. When you use it as an outdoor commercial recreational use, that is what the Viper Field Hockey team is doing there. That's what the soccer team is doing there. And I actually went over, I was checking on their parking calculations on Sunday. I happened to drive by. There's also a lacrosse team, soccer club team there. It's a bunch of high school girls, at least 60 girls there. And you can see in the background of that picture, they have bleachers on these athletic fields. There's no accounting for the numbers of people who come for the bleachers and for the fields. So I think all of that, I think that parking study needs to be revisited and have all those uses specifically addressed. And there's a restaurant on campus. I mean, you can go in and buy something there. It's a restaurant. They also have a store. Those are uses that have different parculations, much higher than it's 1 per 1,000 kind of calculation. And they also have a swimming pool that is completely a commercial use. All the neighbors can sign up. I know I was a member for years. They probably have 200 or 300 families that go there. There's no parking calculations for that. That is absolutely an outdoor commercial recreational use. It's 1 per 150 square feet on that. Swimming pool has to be put into the parking calculations. They have tennis courts, same thing. They lease it out to lots of people. They have Baird Hall, which is it's Baird Library, which is in Walton Hall. That is absolutely an assembly hall. I have just went on their website real quick, and I found Baird Hall is used as a lecture center, open to the public. Let me see if I can find it here. I don't know if this helps. I can give you all these documents at the end here. Tuesday, October 19th, they had Gilbert Heckner there, open to the public to come to Baird Library, Walton Hall. That's an assembly use. They did it again on October 22nd for another individual. Again, that building has to be recalculated. It's not 1 per 1,000. Oh, we don't know what it is. It's an assembly hall, and it absolutely kicks up your parking requirements. I don't know what goes on with the Telescope Center. I think they've had students there. That could be some sort of assembly hall. I really don't know. I'm not that familiar with their buildings. And then this whole Student Union Center, they're just saying we don't know what it is. I mean, does it have a restaurant? It's going to have a store. Is it going to be an assembly hall? Is it going to be a lecture hall? They haven't told us anything that's going on in this building. And it seems kind of ridiculous to build a 40,000 square foot building and no one's disclosed what it's going to be used for. I mean, the Connolly Center is 65,000 square feet. This is almost as big as the Connolly Center. Go over there, they've got a restaurant, an ice cream parlor, a theater, a conference hall. I've taken my CLE classes there with halls for 250 people in them. It's huge. To say it's 1 per 1,000, it was kind of insulting. They also talk about their dorms. It's 1 per 3 residents. I know they have faculty housing there. It should be 1. I think it's 2 spaces per dwelling. I don't know if that's in the calculations. I mean, that's just on parking. I think that whole parking study really needs to be reviewed. And I also think that on the whole idea, when a college comes to you with a plan, there are very specific requirements. This is a planned institutional use. They have to give long-range plans. And when you give a plan, and they gave a plan in 2008, they never disclosed that they were leasing 75 to 150 spaces over at South Campus when it was owned by Valley Forge. They were required to do so under their plan. They were supposed to tell you all about their off-street parking, all their adjacent land uses, and they didn't. They also did not say in 2008 they were building a student union building. Now, under those plans, when they come in with these plans, they're supposed to be stuck with that for 5 years. I mean, I'd like you to ask the zoning officer for a determination. Are they building in accordance with the plans that they're submitting to us? That's a requirement, Section 280-72D. The zoning officer has the right to say, you know what, you guys didn't tell us this. And when you came in 2006, you got parking variances. You shrunk up all your parking spaces to put up all these buildings. And we hooked you. We gave you a variance. We gave you all these short parking spaces because we believed that was it. And now you're going to come in and we're going to put up a 40,000 square foot building. It's gigantic. That should have been disclosed. And that's what the whole idea of having this 5-year plan is, give people like a little chance to kind of get over the impact of putting in these big uses. There's also, lots of things under the code about buffering. All side and rear yards have to be buffered, 20 feet wide, 5 feet high. That's not on any of these plans. That entire campus needs to be buffered. And one of the most important things, which I think, was glossed over because we're acting like we're not talking about South Campus, there's still parking over there. I just drove by tonight, probably had 150 cars out in the parking lot, and they're standing here telling us we've got more than enough parking. It's insulting that we're kind of playing this game here. And they're required under the code to give us an alternative plan that says, you know what, we're going to show you how we'll have the least adverse impact on your neighborhood. We're going to show you how this is going to work. We're going to close off access routes. We're not going to come down your streets. There are a million things they could show us. They don't do anything. They just give you 40,000 square foot building right on the corner of a floodplain, and we don't seem to address all of those issues. There's a whole section, that 28073C3. We should go through it line by line. Are you in conformity with the comprehensive plan? Have you provided any plans showing the least adverse impact on neighbors? Is flooding an impact? Have you discussed what happens with the flooding? Have you shown any mitigating factors that might lessen the impact on the neighbors? None of that has been proposed. So I would ask that those issues would all be discussed. And finally, we heard from the Radnor Conservancy. You've got open space over there. You've got a lot of open space. They should be the primary people that we're talking to about preserving open space by putting a conservation easement on their property. That's it for now. Thank you very much.
Yep, please. Thank you, Colleen. Any other public comment?
Good evening. My name is Mary Packer, and I live at 27 Fairview. I would like to just reiterate and concur with Colleen and Andrew. I was a part of the 2006 review, and Eastern said, give us this. This is all there is. There's not going to be any more. Here we are. The Eagle Learning Center, they took down, I think, was it 400 trees? Some incredible number that we were going to replace. Adding additional parking up there at this point is going to take more green space. It just feels as though whatever we give them, it's not enough. I understand their need to grow, but 40,000 square feet is huge. We have a lot of traffic. Part of it's, we live across the street from a university. That part I get. I just don't see that we're utilizing they're utilizing the space that they have as efficiently as they possibly could. And I think consideration for a roadway system or connecting pieces of their campus internally in order to buffer the community should be very viable and something that they should pursue, both in their best interest and for the neighborhood as well. So I thank you for your work and appreciate the time you've put to this.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Leslie Bose. I live at 1 Fenimore Lane. I'm 4 doors down from the turf field. And my primary concern, and I at the risk of reiterating, and I know you heard this, but by way of testimony, I have to tell you, I've lived at that property since 2002. And when I moved in, what is now the turf field was a sort of crappy, muddy field that housed primarily, just college events. And it has turned into a year-round, all-out leased operation. There are multiple games going on at any given time. All these kids with their parents, they come in at 2-hour time blocks. That access, the parking lot that they use is the lot right at the end of my street, and it's turned into a commercial throughway. Those people come and go. And if you all have kids probably who have played soccer and stuff, you go to these big parks, the parking lot is nearly the size of the fields. And there you know how many cars and how much traffic there is going in and out. So it's been a significant change to our neighborhood. And I tried, I proposed way back then when they were putting the new halls up on the corner that they try to contain their own traffic to their neighborhood, especially given the consistently increasing use of that that turf area. And they did agree to close off that one end because all the traffic flowed out of it. But they said that they can't connect the other parking lot to the rest of their campus in any way because of wetlands and floodplains and all the rest of it. And that seems to be when they want to build a building, it's not quite the critical issue that it is when they say that they can't connect their lot to a state road as opposed to a little residential road. And I just also want to mention that since the last time that proposal was made, they purchased an additional piece of property that might make it worth reviewing. And so when they were building these up here, they didn't own this. And I'm not an engineer, and I really can't say, but the fact that this lot, it's a significant sized lot. I don't know how many spaces there are in that lot, but it's a significant sized lot with a lot of spaces. It's the only use for all these and the gym. And having purchased this piece of property now since the last time, it might give them a little bit more leeway. It might make it more possible for them to let all that exit onto Eagle Road. So, given the increase in commercialization of the property, it's really not an institutional use on the weekends. It's really a commercial use on the weekends. And I would really beg you to make them close that off so that the integrity of our neighborhood is preserved and we're not commercialized. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay. Any further comments from the Planning Commission?
Dan, I have a question I want to clarify about the Board of Commissioners meeting. Last week they reintroduced the floodplain zoning ordinance and talked about it, and they're going to send it back to us from what I saw in the meeting. But the floodplain maps from November 2009 FEMA sends out their maps and it's the new floodplain. Is that something that the township had to vote in to accept? Or is that just, Mr. Coniglia kind of mentioned maybe he wasn't subject to the 2009 floodplains, but, they're the maps. That's what FEMA says is the new floodplain. Doesn't it just become the new standard for the township? Maybe I'm missing something there.
Well, we have a couple of lawyers here who will probably disagree with me, but the map is the map. Yeah,
Right.
FEMA is saying that is the floodplain, and I'm going to make sure that they're not building in the floodplain, because I have to sign a document every year or every other year stating how many properties, how many homes, how many buildings I allow to be constructed in the floodplain. And if I allow that to happen, FEMA can take away our flood insurance for the township, which means that everybody who purchases flood insurance, their rates will go up astronomically.
Mm-hmm.
So
I was just
the
trying to...
floodplain map,
Yeah.
as far as I'm concerned, the 2009 floodplain map is the map, unless I know there's something going on that's clearly wrong. There's a lot of locations, and I think if you remember when we discussed this earlier in the year, there's a lot of locations that were eliminated from the new maps,
Mhm.
but I know they flood. So it's my responsibility to make sure that there's still no building going on in those areas, because I know they flood.
Right, I was just trying to distinguish that the agenda said one thing last week, but in fact, what the Board of Commissioners reintroduced last week was the floodplain ordinance that we all need to now review again when it shows back up on our agenda. But the map is the map. FEMA sends it, that's it.
But FEMA requires the townships, local government to readopt all of that by ordinance. And that's what they were doing. There was a couple changes, a couple things that were discussed at the commissioners' meeting, and that's why it got sent back. So,
Right, we've sat on that thing since January. It was the first thing that I worked on when I came on the board last year. So, didn't it get adopted last December when it came in?
no.
Okay.
I know we have a lot of issues concerning the parking and a lot of things we're probably going to want to talk about, but before we do that, could we get an explanation of the 20% reduction?
Sure, that's right in the code. It's in the zoning code.
It's in the code, isn't it?
Yeah, it's in the zoning code. It's under, definitions. Floor area, it says 80% of the sum of the horizontal floor area. It's 280-4.
Okay. What I'm actually going to suggest is, I would like, obviously, this commission cannot make determinations as to zoning. Parking is a zoning, is part of our zoning ordinance, and only the zoning officer can make an initial determination as to the, or can confirm the parking count as Eastern is put forth. So basically what I'd like to have is Matt Bauman, our zoning officer, obviously review this, make sure that it's in compliance, and do a complete review of this parking count and confirm to us that it is viable, because he is the only one that has the ultimate authority to do that. This commission has no authority. The Board of Commissioners have no authority to question that, that portion of this application. Only Matt Bauman and the zoning board have authority over the parking.
And we can request that he review both the numbers as well as the uses.
Absolutely. I mean, he has to, it is his determination to review their whole parking count scheme. And I don't mean that in any disregard scheme. I'm just saying their proposed parking count. And, you know, I've done this in many other townships, and they put, and then Matt can put forth what he feels each use is along those lines. But that is really under the zoning officer and the zoning board's purview. With that said, I guess I kind of noted a few of these issues that were brought up by various neighbors and residents. One thing I do have, if you could comment as to the intercampus system. I think I know why, because I have been on that campus many times. Why the connection between trying to keep all the traffic flow within the campus, and have you looked into that?
We actually have looked into that, and it's something that is going to be very difficult to do. As you know, the stream and the ponds cut literally right through the campus, so the campus is divided by the stream. There are several, in this area here, there's a stream coming down here. There's steep slopes coming down through there. And any way we would come across, we would have to either build a bridge coming across the stream, coming across the floodplains, coming across the wetlands. There would be an impact on all those areas. Okay. So it's not easily done.
It's not easy, but it is viable at some point in time. I'm taking cost out of the equation.
Cost out of the equation, there would be an option or two that we could look at.
Okay.
Could you do one, I mean, right along, what is it, Fairview Road and that line? There used to, in fact, if I remember correctly, back when I was in high school, back in the 60s, there was a road or a driveway or something that came down between the new piece of property that they had that goes down to the edge of, is that Fairview?
At the corner of Fenimore and Fairview from Eagle.
Down
Yep.
Right there. Right there. It's been gone for so long.
There's gone.
See?
There's actually.
I'm getting old, but I remember these things.
One of the issues with that, there is the stream that comes through there, coming off of Eagle Road right there. You don't have your sight distance coming off that down through there, but there's also the electric lines that literally run down through there too.
Are they underground or are they above?
Yeah, they're aerial. Actually, there's some underground and they're aerial.
The electrical, I don't care. Why it would seem, and this is just speculation from Andrew who does stuff for the government. Why would it be impossible to carry the road that ends out on Fairview by that right below your finger there? Right there. Why couldn't you just connect the road that comes over from Walton Hall and all the way over to where you have the bollards, carry that around and carry it up?
Through here?
Yeah, all the way up to Eagle Road. Because what you would in effect be doing is creating a circle around the outside. And that way you would have the ability to have two entrances and not that would solve their problem, because if you had sports events that were going on there, unless you put a chain link fence with a razor wire or something up there, people would still park on those roads and walk over to the thing. But at least it would be, that would not be the only way to get to that parking lot. You would be able to connect that parking lot to basically a loop road around the edge, like you do with security at military installations, which I used to know best. Or is that not?
It's really not feasible to come through here to carry this road. The gatehouse that sits here, the space that's literally between the road right-of-way and the edge of the pond isn't wide enough to carry a road through here. This whole area is in the 100-year floodplain, so you'd be in the 100-year floodplain coming across. This is the stream coming down through here, so even if you could come through here, you're crossing the stream at some point to be able to get back up here. He said access on Eagle Road there doesn't have the sight distance. We would end up connecting this and coming down further down Eagle Road, but it's the problem is coming down through here and the location of this stream coming through here and the amount of space that we have. We also looked at coming through the stream and the fields. It's tight coming through here, but I said it'd be coming down through here and trying to cross over the stream is the issue there, and having the room to put a full width of a road, a two-way road too.
Okay.
Thank you.
You have a policy regarding buses when they arrive on the campus for athletic events?
I believe they do. I believe the university can address
I mean,
that.
you obviously don't rely on the driver to decide where to camp out.
I
right?
believe they're given directions.
Yeah, I'm David Black. Excuse me. We do have a policy, and it is that they stay on the interior of the campus, not
Right.
not enter.
So that bus driver was obviously violating.
He was.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you try to police that as much as you
We
can.
do.
Yeah.
While you're up, can you address the uses, the specific uses you intend for the student center, the new building, student union?
Sure. There would be dining commons, offices for student development staff, a counseling center for students, a small meditation chapel, and meeting rooms for student organizations.
And the previous building is Walton Hall?
Walton Hall,
And
yes.
what is your planned use for Walton Hall?
Music. We would relocate the music department from, what was the old president's home, and I never remember what it was called before we bought it. It was not the Harrison property, but the one next to it. Yeah. So we would relocate music to Walton Hall.
And then what is...
Music and dance. The dining commons would be split for music
Okay.
and dance.
Okay. Okay, and I'm sorry, now back to the engineer. The floodplain, between the 2009 and the old floodplain, the new building, according to your calculations and your design, is not in the floodplain?
It is not. I don't have the map with me tonight. I don't know if I can borrow the map from Colleen and I'll explain it.
Looks like it's in it.
As she had mentioned, the 1993 is the red area. I know the color doesn't come up very good. And the new 2009 is the area in blue. And you can see it does, over here, extend out past. Over here, the new line shows it literally going up across the baseball field, up behind home plate, coming back down. And on the south side, it does show it coming closer to the building and further south. We do have, in the process of making an application to FEMA, because according to the elevations, they have cross sections on their plan here to delineate what the elevation is at that line. And if you use their elevations, it does not represent the topographical data for the campus. So the study, and we downloaded their update.
You moved the building, though, because...
You did move the building.
We moved it because it was in the 2009 floodplain.
So this is the old plan?
Well, what it is, yeah, this is the old plan. there's a heavy line, which you probably cannot see, that we delineated using their elevations, which brings it up, back and around the building and just nipped the corner of the building where we had it shown. So we moved the building forward about 10 feet to get it out of the floodplain.
Okay.
So
Now-
we are applying to FEMA to get this redelineated.
That's what I was going to say. So with the 2000, according to the map that they have right now, the 2009, the building is, according to their map, your building would fall within the 2009 floodplain. But in accordance with the elevations that FEMA provides, you are seeking a map change through FEMA to
Correct.
delineate that specifically to the topographic.
Correct. Yes, they're studying, as they have in their report. They did not do a backwater study, nor did they come out and do any topographical surveying to produce
did
their
they ever.
study. So, obviously, with this line going up and back on the baseball field isn't correct when the baseball field's completely flat.
Okay. One of the other concerns that was raised is the applicability of the 5-year plan from, I guess, the 2008 submission of, again, with regards to anything in the zoning code that really is under map, any determinations under our zoning code is under the, really under the purview of Matt Bauman and the zoning officer, and so he would have to make a distinct determination as to the applicability of that provision to this application. We are only, our job is for the SALDO and the enforcement of the SALDO ordinance. So anything that is in the SALDO ordinance is fair game for this commission, but if it does refer back to zoning, zoning is its own quasi-judicial entity and needs to be referred to Matt. So I would ask that Matt also review, have him make a determination with regard to that aspect of this.
Dan, can you clarify for me? I thought we couldn't build within so many feet of a floodplain.
No, you cannot build in the floodplain. There's no buffering, there's no setback from the floodplain.
Okay.
Yeah, you may be thinking of the riparian buffer.
No, I think that I'm thinking of when we worked on the floodplain back in January, we proposed putting it didn't get passed yet, so it's not applicable, but the stuff we worked on back in January, we did actually talk about creating a buffer of can't build within so many feet of the floodplain, but, okay, thank you.
And the last issue that I have would be the traffic impact study. And
We'll have to, Mark, we'll have to obviously provide that too. This is the first we heard that it's required, although it is in the code. So obviously, we're not going to have any
exactly, and given the given now that you've continued to hear, I mean, and I applaud you for the working with the neighbors from the last application in putting the bollards up. I like I said, I do go by there a lot and I see them, and I was curious as to whether they were always in place or whether they didn't. But obviously, you've mitigated some of the traffic off of Fairview Drive in Fenimore, because I know that's a very minor artery that passes through our township. But obviously, with the increased building size and where you are now with your student population, we really probably do need to see a new traffic impact study for Eagle Road and King of Prussia Road, specifically that intersection, since you will be affecting that intersection in my mind. Is there any other concerns from the Planning Commission?
Mark, notwithstanding your comments about the zoning nature of parking requirements, from a planning point of view, I want to echo Matt's comments. I think everybody knew where I was going. I'm not excited about the additional parking up in the Eagle, the new Eagle building area. It just strikes me as contrived, to be honest with you. I agree with everything Matt says with respect to that intersection and that entrance. That was a concern. Everything he mentioned was a concern at that time. I can't imagine that anybody who wanted to use the student center would voluntarily choose to park up at the Eagle classroom area. I think, as you well know, when there is a development in the interior part of a campus, we naturally tend to view it differently than a development on the exterior. And to move something that might be put on the interior part of the campus out to the exterior, I think it's just creating problems that, from a planning point of view, is not a good idea. And I don't see the practicality of adding
if we need parking spaces for this new building, putting them way up at the entrance at Eagle Road isn't, nobody's going to, those spots, I suspect, are going to be grabbed by the students who live in that dormitory up there or up at that end of the campus. That may not increase the number of cars coming through the entrance, but it is going to increase the activity and affect the existing setbacks in that area. So I don't think that's a good idea.
My only other comment is, going along with that, it's open space, or it's woodlands and so forth right now, isn't it?
Actually, it is clear. There's no trees that needs to be removed for that parking.
No, but you're adding surface parking to a corner that was historically 10, 12 acres of woodland, which you've cut down 400-plus trees. I mean,
remember,
Nick,
I agree with you.
Nick,
Remember, there's a trade-off.
Yeah, but there was 4 years ago we had this discussion.
But there was a trade-off on why we put that there, and we traded off closing that one entrance.
I recall.
I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying.
Yeah, I think aesthetically for your campus, it's a real step down to have a surface parking lot right at the front of your entrance. But that's your decision. I advocated when you came before us before. Hey, come to us for a height variance. You know, give us a reason why maybe you might want to consider going up in the middle of your campus as opposed to keep spreading out and, you know, clearing trees. I mean, there's got to be some creative solution here. And I mean, I personally think it's structured parking where it's not seen by most of your neighbors and where it's buried in your campus. But, you know, maybe you have some other ideas.
Okay. Well, we do need a traffic study, Nick. So with that in mind, we are not ready to move forward. We would ask, obviously, depending on the timing issue of where we can agree on this, if verbally you can give us an extension, and then you can work with John, sure, Mr. Rice, to figure out the timing, and you can agree through letters on the timing.
Yeah, the difference in the timing is I'm looking at the state statute, which if you don't meet that, there's a deemed approval. You have in your ordinance a different step where the planning commission has to meet within a certain period of time. It's less than 90 days. It's more conservative. So that's Dan's date. But if you don't meet that date, there's no penalty. So I'm looking at the 90-day clock. So okay, under 508, it runs from October 4th, the 90 days. Dan keeps a different schedule that's in your ordinance, which is more conservative. So either way, I guess they're coming back to your December your December
you can
meeting.
Have a traffic study by then.
Can't believe it's December all.
And if we're not back by December, then we'll give you we'll definitely give you an extension for if we have to wait till January because of the traffic study.
But just a couple observations and comments about some of what I heard. I think it might be good. You must have a drawing of this building and what it's going to be used for. There's got to be an architect's drawing of what every room's going to be used for. That might be helpful for the Planning Commission to see. So when you're telling us today that it's going to be a chapel and student rooms, that, you know, that can always be changed a year down the road. So I think that would be helpful because I don't think that level of detail gets submitted with a land, not required, but I think it would be helpful to have that. The other question I have about parking is the South Campus has a lot of parking currently. If that goes away, for whatever reason, you can't use that to park anymore, what's that going to do with parking on the campus, and how many parking spots is Eastern using on the South parking campus? Somehow you got to wrap that into this calculation. Because if you can't use that for parking, then where are those students, I assume you give them permits, or you must have some number of permits for parking of the Eastern students. I know there's other students parking there now. But what happens if that goes away? Because there's a question about whether you can continue to use that as a off-site satellite parking lot. And I guess the other thing is, and I've been talking to Dan, is there a written waiver request? There's a requirement that you submit. If you're not going to comply with all the provisions in the saldo, then there's got to be some kind of written waiver. Okay. So everything in the subdivision land development ordinance, all the parking criteria and all that is all being met. Nothing's, okay. All right. Thanks. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you.
Mark, they need transportation and traffic studies, right? Those are two different things, or they get rolled into one?
Yeah.
Is that how they, but it's practically speaking, it's the traffic study?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. With that, do we have a motion to table? Oh, sorry, Doug?
I'll make such a motion. Table it until next time.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Colleen, I believe, sorry. Well. Next on our agenda has been referred to us from the Board of Commissioners, a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners regarding ordinance number 2010, amending Chapter 280 of the zoning code by adding definitions for student home and adding student homes as a special exception use permitted within the R1, R1A, R2, R3, R4, R5, and R6 zoning districts throughout Radnor Township, and adding regulations for student home uses in order to promote and protect the public health, safety, and general welfare. With that, Dan, are you presenting on that, or is Mr. Rice?
Well, I hadn't planned to present, but since I drafted the ordinance, I can tell you where the draft came from and answer any questions about it. That's the main reason why I came tonight, just to go through that and if the Planning Commission has any discussion about this. We looked at some of the adjacent municipalities and what they do with student housing, and I think all your neighbors have this use as a use in their zoning ordinance. The township Radnor has an existing ordinance which governs not only student housing but other types of rental units in the township. And quite frankly, it's not real clear. A lot of the provisions, it's difficult to enforce. And in my view, it's better to be put into your zoning ordinance. Right now, the use basically in this standalone ordinance permits no more than 2 unrelated students living in a student home. There's a separation distance under the existing ordinance in terms of student home separation distance between more than 1 or 2, but it's a difficult, and I've tried to enforce it on a couple occasions, and we're in the midst of a couple other enforcement issues. We have a provision, or at least the way it's been interpreted is, it's been interpreted to mean 2 or more, no more than 2 unrelated students. I don't really see any reason to have that unrelated student issue in. And it's in the zoning ordinance that we drafted, but it seems to me that whatever the number is that you're going to limit students in a student house, it ought to be, and we picked 3 because that seems to be what is the standard. There's a couple court cases that have upheld that configuration, but I think it ought to be students, whether they're related or not related. And if there's a special circumstance involving related students, then they can always go to the zoning hearing board and get relief. Right now, you have a enforcement mechanism which requires some kind of a notice of violation to go to the landlord, and there's a rental housing board then which hears an appeal of that. But it's not real clear what happens after that. with that particular board. We had a hearing about a year ago. That board had special counsel. We called witnesses. I put witnesses on a witness stand, and they were found to be in violation, and nothing really changed after that. I mean, I like putting this into a zoning ordinance because there's a recognized enforcement mechanism under the MPC, and you issue notices of violation, and if they're ignored, you have the right to essentially walk into Delaware County and secure an injunction for compliance. It's a little unclear, although we've been trying to enforce a standalone ordinance. I don't think it's appropriate because I think it's a zoning issue. There's a list of criteria that are in this ordinance. This ordinance also limits the use to not all the districts in the township, because right now these uses can be anywhere in any district in the township because it's not a zoning ordinance. So this is geared towards primarily the residential zoning districts and also has some fairly specific criteria, which I think in terms of establishing and then enforcing these going forward, we're going to have a better track record doing that. So, I guess I'm here to answer any questions. This is not an ordinance that I consider written in stone, and it certainly can be modified going forward.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions?
I noticed on page 1, in what appears to be the definition of student home, the last 2 sentences of that definition are really substantive provisions, and I'd suggest don't belong in the definition. They belong broken out into a substantive section.
As one of the requirements, later with the other requirements.
Well, I don't know that this is a requirement. I think this is the fundamental legal point, isn't it? If you have a student home, it's permitted only when authorized by special exception. That's the guts of the statute. It's not only buried in a definition, but it's buried in, it ought to stand out on its own, I think. Now I have a question regarding the current, regarding this ordinance. What will be the rule regarding student housing in zoning districts other than those mentioned? Will it, commercial district, for example?
They won't be permitted going forward.
Won't be permitted at all under
Correct.
the existing code?
If this ordinance would be enacted, if you have an existing student home in some other zoning district, it would be a non-conforming use, but new ones would not be able to be established.
Is that clear from here that a student housing may only be in these districts and that it's only by special exception?
It's clear to me.
Okay.
But if you have a suggestion to make it clear.
Well, I don't have a specific, I have a specific suggestion regarding the first point I made, that is, break those 2 sentences out in a substantive section. But,
I mean, basically what we did is we went through each of the districts, and there's amendments, as you can see, in
yeah, but stepping away.
Article 2, Article 3, Article 4.
Yeah,
right.
But what about the other zoning sections? Where is it said that student housing is not permitted in those districts?
It's not going to be listed in those particular districts as a permitted use. There's a list of permitted uses in every zoning district that you have.
All right, so by, okay. All right.
You don't have to go in, and some ordinances have tables by districts, and it'll have all the uses, and it'll say a P or a SE or a C or an N. I'm not sure we have a comprehensive table like that, but other than that, where you can see that all on one page, maybe that's something we should do. But but you don't have to go
No,
in.
but I understand your point. The amendments here will permit it in these zoning sections, but it's
Correct.
not permitted in the others.
Right.
Okay.
What about the planned institutional zoning district? Why wouldn't it be included in the planned institutional zoning district if for a case where there might be a freestanding house under separate ownership that could be rented out? You'd think that's where you'd want the students to be.
That's a judgment call. I mean, that's a policy decision. We looked at the districts where they existed and seemed to make the most sense, just looking at the structure of the zoning ordinance.
Would
But
you be concerned about including planned institutional for those rare occasions where there might be a separate house, separate from an institution that's a rental?
I guess what I would want to know, and I know Matt has a map or at least a list of all these uses currently. I'd like to know how many are in the PI currently.
Okay.
And, then make a judgment call. The rule with permitting this in zoning districts is you have to provide it somewhere. You folks know your township much better than I do in terms of what's the existing uses, but the fact that we've listed the R1, the R1A, R2, R3, R4, some of those may not be appropriate. We didn't do a survey of all the neighborhoods, but you've got to provide for the use if you're going to put it in your zoning ordinance. Right now, it's unrestricted. Go anywhere under the standalone ordinance.
Did you think about going, I know you had said that related students versus unrelated students, you didn't think was an issue.
Well,
But it's still written in here as 3 unrelated. Would you consider just
I would take the word.
take the word out?
And I have it circled on my, the more I've thought about that, I know why that was put in there, and I know why it's been interpreted that way. It's from a 1993 Lower Murray and Zoning Hearing Board case.
Okay.
And that ordinance was challenged on different grounds. I'm not sure, to me, if you're a student, you're a student. And if you have a unique situation where you have a families living together and they're all students, well, there's always relief that you can get from a zoning hearing board on that situation. Right now, since we use the word unrelated, if there's 3 students in a student home and 2 of them happen to be cousins, we then have to get birth certificates. We're doing that today. We're trying to prove that out-of-state students, and it just makes no sense to me to go to those lengths if it's, whatever the number of students is, and I think 3 is probably the most defensible number. They're students, whether they're related, whether they're unrelated, and it ought to apply across the board.
And the number 3, that's one up from, it was 2 previously.
Right now, it is 2.
But in terms of practical, your practical experience at looking at this, typically how many students are living in a home that's rented to students?
I don't.
Do you have any sense of that?
I know we have some rental units where there's only 2 on file, but there's 4 or 5 cars parked there.
I just think that the 2 or 3 is actually restrictive, considering the housing stock in the town. I mean, I look around and I see the town, but that would only work if you could control it. I mean, if you say it's 2, but it's really 4, then you don't want to say it's 4 and end up with 8. But I think if we could find a way to make this document real, I think you'd want to go with 3 or even 4, but then keep it at 3 or even 4 and not have.
I think this is a situation where, regardless of what the number is, there's going to be serious enforcement issues. And I'm having a hard time even going to 3, only because there was a kid who came to a Board of Commissioners meeting last month, 2 months ago, and acknowledged that there is blatant disregard for the rule and that kids break it all the time. Now, that might be the argument to say 3, because, if it's 3-bedroom houses. But the bigger point is that regardless of how many you have, they're breaking it. And the economics of it encourage it. And the bigger question for me, which I actually have here for John, is, what's going to be there has to be a financial disincentive to the landlord for breaking the rules, because right now there's not. And Mark and I had a brief conversation about that, is that under administrative, rules, or, where do you put the teeth in where until there's not the financial incentive for the kids to break the rules without the landlord's knowledge, or for the landlord to break the rules because it's financially, advantageous. Regardless of what the number is, there's going to be serious breaking of the rules, and I think anybody who lives in Garrett Hill is going to come up here and say, "Yep, that's what's so." So I don't think the number actually matters so much. Although I would have a hard time going up to 3, just because I think we have a hard enough time right now at 2. I think what matters more is coming up with what can we put in here to really have some enforcement teeth, because that's where the problem is.
Well, my response to that.
The reason to put it into zoning, what was sort of John's motivation was that it would be more enforceable.
Well, one of my comments that I wrote down here, whatever it is, it would seem logical to me if you went back to Article 10, item T, and I said it says the owner, whatever, but I said, what kind of enforcement do you have? Would you be in a position to revoke for a period of time the special exception in the event that somebody violates it?
Well, I think part of, and this is in the current ordinance, but I don't think it's ever happened. The special exception would permit the use. There'd have to be some kind of annual licensing, and then that annual licensing would be revoked upon findings of violations. I mean, the only financial incentive you're going to get with a zoning ordinance is revocation of that license for the. I mean, you get the special exception, then you get a zoning permit or a license, whatever you want to call it, that goes with that. You revoke that, then they have no ability to rent that out to students. That's the financial incentive. Or if you go to district justice court, you can file a citation, but it's rare that you're going to get the maximum fine. I mean, our zoning ordinances have a per diem, every day a violation, and the MPC tracks this, is, it could be up to $1,000 a day. I've rarely seen that happen unless you get into county court and you have an ongoing, you might get a county court judge to hit somebody with that kind of a fine. But it's going to be an enforcement issue. The township could hire a full-time tenant housing enforcement officer tomorrow, and they would be busy 40 hours a week. I mean, right now.
But would revocation for a period of, say, 2 years or 3 years, would there be the kind of disincentive to them? I would think if there was if you had revoked it and then somebody continued to rent it out, ostensibly to one person who gets 4 buddies to come in, and now is the landlord the one renting it out, or is it the buddies?
Well, the landlord's going to be primarily responsible. This would also encompass violations by the tenants. We're having a discussion now about citing not only the landlord but the students who are all from out of state in district justice court. I mean, that's where you end up enforcing something like this. And I just think that if we've got to have some kind of a consistent enforcement policy. I don't think it's really possible under the current regulations, the way they read. And it makes more sense to put it in zoning. And if we have to cite students, we may have to do that. I would think that the landlords, once they understand what the rules are, and the existing homes are going to be grandfathered in and be treated as non-conforming uses, they're not going to go away. We can't take that away.
No, why is that? If we're creating a whole new, that was one of the notes I put on my. So I had a couple of questions for you, John. One is, and this letter came tonight. It's sitting on our desk about. It seems like we were no longer providing for students and a student use in apartments or commercial district. Now, the commercial district, I go back and forth on that one. But are they? The way I read this, there's no longer a use permitted for the apartments. In the various areas. So. Just. That was one question.
Pretend as if there's no zoning at all. and you bring in a brand-new zoning ordinance, and someone is operating, pick a use, gas station, and now it's no longer permitted in that zoning district.
Right.
Pennsylvania Supreme Court is a very, this has been the law since about 1930, probably. They're very protective of non-conforming uses. And, I mean, there's plenty of case law. You can't take away. You can limit it. You can limit the expansion. You can make them, if they want to expand, go. And you have some of those provisions in your zoning ordinance. You can make them get a special exception if they want to expand it. There's all kinds of things you can do, but you can't bring in a new zoning regulation. If somebody's operating currently within the guidelines of the law, if there's people that are doing student houses now that aren't registered under our existing regulation, then, and we find that out, then those folks don't get grandfathered in.
Or the ones who are breaking it with having more than two students.
If you have that list.
No, that's what I'm saying. I mean, those are the people who won't be grandfathered, the people who are breaking our current rules that are in existence. But there's, you know, for instance, I know there's a variety of places that clearly have student homes closer than 1,000 feet to one another, you know.
And some of them may have been there. I think the existing ordinance was drafted in 2001.
I'm
It's
just
almost
saying
10 years old.
If they're within the 1,000 feet.
But they may have been existing as of 2001.
But right, I mean, I guess the way,
But if they're
the easy way to do
complying-
this is the way that the township would deem a nonconformity on this would be, they have to have student housing licenses. So basically,
Yeah, right, that's my
anyone
point.
that has a student housing license at this point in time, when we go through with this and the commissioners enact it, would be a non-conforming use. That student would be, because they've already had a license. Whether we've caught them in violation or not caught them in violation, they still have the license. Now, they would be non-conforming it's now 2 students?
2 unrelated.
So they would be actually non-conforming as to the 2 students. So if we took it to 3, they could possibly seek through special exception to take that to 3 students.
Right.
But then they would give up their non-conformity and actually be as of right by special exception.
Right.
But that's what I was trying to get at, is that, so, okay, the people who are compliant under our current regulations, much as it pains me, get to be grandfathered, but the people who are not, don't.
Right.
All right, that was one. Then the other question is, so this whole notion of who's, P and Q, you know, the owner of the property shall provide the township with the number of residents and the names and the contact information for each student residing therein, and then if there's any change in the property, there seems like there's a lot of administrative oversight that would be required in some of these obligations.
It's already existing.
Right, who's doing that, the zoning officer, or is it?
Matt Bauman.
Wow.
Like
Well, so at least now with this, he'd have the zoning teeth to do something. The only other question I had is kind of a bigger picture, and it's not going to be covered under use, but it is a question for me, is that, is there a regulation under which we can consider a landlord who owns multiple properties, either within an area or within the township, because they're registered as having multiple student residences, that they are conducting a business within our township, and that they have to pay either business privilege tax, or they're not able to have trash pickup, residential trash pickup, because they're conducting a for-profit business of renting student houses. And I got clear today, we can't put that in this, but as an aside, I mean, it seems like we if we're going to do this, let's put as much teeth out there as we can, and, you know, is there a way to consider those individuals who are conducting business in Radnor in that way, to catch them, not catch them in a bad way, but pick up some business use tax or some revenue, or not have to pick up their students' trash or whatever?
That would be something that,
You know, like we don't pick up trash from all the commercial businesses on Lancaster Avenue.
so if someone has how many student homes? 2, 3, 4?
Some number, I mean, I don't know if there's precedent for that. That's,
Yeah, I don't know of any, but, you know, if that, I guess that would be something for Bill Martin to look at, whether or not, if someone has that many business activities, because it's a business activity, whether that somehow can be captured under the 511 taxes. I don't know, though.
Yeah, that's kind of my point. Okay, that was, I really, the only other question I had was are dormitories and fraternities are specifically excluded in this, but are they provided somewhere else in zoning at all? Or are dorms and frats not allowed in Radnor?
PI, planned institutional.
Okay. All right, that's all I had.
I had a question about the setback, the 1,000-foot setback to other properties. I realized that, like in Garrett Hill and other places, there's a lot of, student homes that are already there that are much closer. But just looking at it on the paper, it seems very restrictive. And I'm wondering, is this the standard for other townships, the 1,000-foot setback?
I believe that some of your neighbors have that, and I'm thinking that that's in the current code, too.
Yeah, our current
1,000.
student is 1,000.
Yeah, it's currently 1,000 feet.
Because to me, I know that in a practical sense, many of them are closer, and those will be grandfathered in and if they're in compliance. But when you think about the amount of space that accounts for, if it's 1,000 feet in every direction, it's a huge space. And I think that might be overly restrictive. I don't know if that's something that's challengeable or if but that's why I'm asking is that a standard? Or is that just something that was already there so we didn't look at it?
That, I haven't got a map out and put a point, and then, but since it was already in place, and, I don't know what the numbers are in terms of student housing, but there's quite a few in the township. As long as we're not
It almost seems as if we're
gerrymandering.
saying nobody else can have a student house.
Well,
because it's such a big number. And I don't know if that would be feasible.
But I don't think it's big enough to the point where we're excluding the use going forward. You have a lot of these uses existing. You can have dimensional criteria so large that on paper you permit a use, and when you go and apply it to your zoning map, there's no place you can do it. I don't think that's the case here with this.
A question on Article 10D. Special exception authorizing student home shall expire without further action by the township unless it conforms to all the applicable accordance. Is there a time limit on that? Are you going to give them a certain amount of time to?
Well, we could put a time period within that. I guess the concept is that zoning hearing board grants a special exception, and then before a zoning permit would be issued or a building permit, whatever would come as a result of that, the zoning officer or the code official is going to review and make sure all other requirements, there might be building code requirements, are met. Probably would not be a bad idea to put some kind of time limit in there so that that's not left open.
Well, because as it is, the guy could arbitrarily choose a very short time period, like 5 days, and that wouldn't be rational.
No.
Okay.
Well, right now, I think you have special exceptions, I think, expire currently under, I think there's a provision in your zoning ordinance.
6 months.
6 months?
6 months.
That would probably be what we'd be looking at, something like that.
All right, another one is H. Student home shall be set back a minimum of 150 feet from any dwelling unit that's not owned by a college, university, or other educational facility. I assume that's set back in all directions, is that correct?
Yes.
What would happen if, say, a house, one of these places is 155 feet from the adjacent house, but the adjacent house has got plenty of opportunity within its building line to expand it. They decide to put a 25-foot addition on one side of it, still within the buildable lot area. And now they're within now they're not only 140 feet away
The student home.
from the student home. The student home hasn't done anything. The adjacent property owner has done something.
That's not going to create a zoning violation for the student home. The student home is established and it meets the 150 feet. Somebody else happens to encroach within that, it's not going to affect the student home.
But if, for example, if somebody said that, well, they let whatever it is lapse on June, and then in September they want to turn it back into a student home, they've got a 3-month period there where it wasn't a student home, and now you're no longer grandfathered, they wouldn't be able to do it. Is that right?
Explain that again.
They meet the requirements for a student
Student
residence.
home, right.
Okay, but now they're only 140 feet from the house next door. because,
What,
because the people next door built an addition.
okay.
And they let that lapse because the summer came and went.
Let what lapse? The
Get
student home?
the student home status. And then in the fall, they want to turn it back into a student home, and now it's only 140 feet.
A 3-month time period is not going to take away the use.
All right.
You know what, this is the one that I actually think seems onerous, is the 150 feet. I can almost get my hands around 1,000 feet between two different student homes, but when I think about even a home set in R1, which is an acre, if I wanted to rent my home as a student home, I'm on well over an acre, but I'm not 150 feet away from the home next to me. That, I actually think that's more onerous than, I wouldn't want two student, I can totally wrap my hands around not wanting two student homes on a residential street, but to say that a student home can't be 150 feet, has to be at least 150 feet away from basically every other dwelling around it that's not owned by a college, university, or other educational facility. To me, Julia, that's the one that seems really onerous to me. Potentially really overly restrictive, because I'm not 150 feet from my next door neighbor.
What would you suggest?
Yeah, it's one of those arbitrary, I mean, I guess maybe some of this is going to be a work in motion where we looked, asked Matt, biggest lots are what, R1, minimum of an acre, right?
In the other zoning districts, almost all the setbacks for buildings are from property lines, not from other buildings.
Right.
And I think that I'm having trouble wrapping my mind around that the student home should have any different setbacks than the other homes on the street. But maybe I'm not as familiar with the issue.
I think that's what I'm saying, is that once you're meeting the requirements of, R1 or R5, I'm just really, I think that's pretty restrictive. That's a big property to not be 150 feet from the next dwelling. I can't even think of a district that would have that except for the large estates. So I'm not sure what the standard is around town. And you're right, the vast majority of the houses that already exist in Radnor will, that are registered, are grandfathered, and this won't apply. But if a new new applicant wanted to come in, that's a big distance. So, what's the right number?
We can relook. I can relook at that. That's a judgment call.
So I don't know I don't know if that number got pulled from somebody else's ordinance.
Well, that's what I want to look
Okay.
at, because we have a bunch of different ordinances that we looked at.
Sure.
and
All right.
Put as much into this, that made some sense,
Yeah.
and we can back off of some of this if it's.
Isn't the intent that the judgment call be made by the zoning hearing board?
Not on this. This is a piece of legislation that, is going to, once enacted by the Board of Commissioners, you're going to have to make a recommendation on it before it goes to them. But there ought to be some kind of a setback for this use, whether it's 150 feet or whether it needs to be defined differently. If someone wants relief from the 150 feet, then they're going to end up going to the zoning hearing board. But we've got to
Well, they have to go by special exception anyway, don't they?
Right, but they may not need to get a variance if the setback.
You mean
is-
they're going to have to get a variance?
If they can't meet the 150.
Right.
Yeah, or the 100 or
But
whatever.
the standard, of course, is different.
Correct, right.
I have another
Well,
question.
do we, Dan, you must have an idea where you could probably tell us where the top 50 dwellings are, right?
Yeah, under the current ordinance, we have them mapped out in our GIS system, so, we're measuring distances between now.
And have you sort of overlaid, using that term loosely, those 150, or did you say 50 or 150?
Well, the 1,000 feet between properties, that's current. We have not looked at the 150 feet between the actual structure. That's going to be tough. There's not a lot of areas where there's 150 feet.
Well,
between
but
homes.
as a general proposition, you said you have mapped in how many houses?
Oh, I don't know the number.
Well, whatever they are. Is it possible to sort of overlay those on this proposed ordinance and see whether you've got some flashpoints or there's going to be a problem?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, Dan, you can look into that for the next meeting.
Yes.
I had two more ones. Under Q, it says the property owner shall notify the township when there's a change of individual students residing within that. How many times is the landlord going to be able to know whether, Joe moves out and Fred moves in? I mean, hopefully they would, but.
They better.
Well.
There's leases on, all the current ones, the landlords are filing leases with the township.
Are they filing leases with each of the students that's in there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, that would make that easy enough. And then the other one was was R.
Well, let me say this. Whether we don't, they're filing the leases for the two that they're permitted. The other ones who are visiting, who are related, we're not getting leases. We know that there's houses where there's 3, 4, 5 cars. They're the enforcement problems. The ones that we know about, the ones that we get complaints on. We don't get leases on the other 2 or 3 people.
I'm shocked.
So.
R goes right to that. No student residing in the student home shall conduct himself or herself in a disruptive manner. It's easy to put that in ordinance, but I don't think you're going to be able to force that. We're talking about college kids most of the time. And I remember when I was in college.
We were all disruptive at some time or another, right?
Any other questions or comments? I mean, this is something that obviously I don't think that we're going to move forward on this tonight. I think it's things I think we've put through some issues that we'd like to get some feedback from staff. And we can look into this further at our next meeting. Okay, motion to table?
So moved.
Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize, I'm jumping. I actually, I have one letter I do want to read, but come on up, Sarah. It is from an Albert Levin, LP, dated November 1st, 2010. I think this is the letter that Sue referred to earlier. Basically, as we briefly discussed, our organization has concerns about the above-referenced proposed ordinance. As you know, we manage several apartment complexes in Radnor Township. Our buildings are located in the R5, R6, and PA zoning districts. We are aware that the primary objective of the proposed ordinance is to address issues that have arisen in neighborhoods of single-family homes. We believe that apartment buildings should be specifically excluded from the subject ordinance and object to the current form of same. Apartment buildings have not been properly contemplated in the drafting of the proposed parameters. Times tend to change, and our business must have the ability to adapt to market conditions in order to survive. We have been very discerning and effective in managing our buildings over the last 50 years. Kindly redraft the ordinance to exclude apartment buildings. Apartment complexes in the township are currently cited where there would be no negative impact upon the community. Please submit this letter for the record at the Planning Commission and the Board of Commissioners when the proposed ordinance is on the agenda. Since we must preserve our rights, this letter shall also serve as formal notice that all of our apartment units are hereby student rentals or potential student rentals. Sincerely, Albert Levin, LP, signed by Raymond M. Levin.
I'm Sarah Pilling, and I live at 29 Garrett Avenue, and I've been involved in this whole issue since 2001 when the ordinance came in because it needed to come in because Garrett Hill was out of control. I did a little recap tonight while I was sitting here as part of the Garrett Hill study. I did a lot of the research, so I pretty well know who's in every house. And it's really interesting to look at the differences from Lancaster to the bridge, which is the end I live on. We have 4 student rentals. One's a twin, one's a single, and 2 more are a twin. And in one of those twins, there are 6 cars every day. We have 2 empty. We have 19 owner-occupied at our end of the street and 3 other rentals, family rentals. On the other side from the bridge is where the problem is. We have 11 rentals. That's to non-students, 3 for sale. 1 seems abandoned. either 6 or 7 student rentals, 5 owner-occupied, and 3 business buildings. The reason the 1,000 feet came in was to stop anybody else other than those houses on Garrett Avenue. And I'm only going to speak specifically about Garrett Avenue. I know Linda Gonzalez is here as well. To stop any other student rentals from coming in. Because Garrett Avenue is very small. Our properties are about, optimistically, somewhere between 35 and 40 feet apart. I know that the initials are grandfathered. The question I have, which I don't see in here, which is in the current ordinance, if you have a student housing ordinance and for one reason or another you do not rent it for one school year, you lose your rental license and it cannot be rented to students again. And that was put in so that the current flock of houses on Garrett Avenue, there might be a chance that they could be a family rental, but they couldn't be a student rental. So I think I'd like to see that in here because it's the only way we're going to get some of these houses to get back to either family rental or owner-occupied. Because if they're not making a bajillion bucks renting to students, maybe they'll consider selling them. There's no doubt that between the bridge and Conestoga Road, it's a constant deteriorating situation because there's so many rentals. There are 11 and 6. There's 17 rental properties, and they're not being kept up. I well realize I had a question to myself about already grandfathered, but that's been answered. But I'd really like to see an inclusion that said if you don't rent it for a school year, and they rent it from May to June, it's actually 13 months they collect rent at this point, then they lose their right to have that rental license. I think it would help these neighborhoods like Bryn Mawr, Ward 5, that is just chock-a-block full of students, and they're really struggling with it, as are we. That it would maybe give a chance for this neighborhood to redeem itself and to come back. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Linda Gonzalez. I live at 251 Callahan Avenue. And unlike Sarah, my presentation's more personal. 2 points I wanted to make to Mr. Rice. 246 Callahan Avenue did lose their license, 2 of them upstairs and down. And he then sold his house, and we now have a family downstairs and a teacher upstairs. So the ordinance did at one point work when it was being enforced. And as far as commercial, I'm a little, I would think that it would be in the best interest of our neighbors to have students in the commercial areas where they're not disrupting residents. I would also like to suggest, I think it may have been brought up at a commissioners meeting, to raise the license application to a higher amount other than I think it's currently at $75. Maybe something more like $200 to cover some of the costs that the township incurs in covering all the expenses and tracking them and whatnot. And now this would be my long stretch of personal. First, I'd like to mention that I don't believe the township took enough steps to be transparent in what they're proposing in the student housing. When Garrett Hill was working on its changes, notices were mailed and emailed to residents and physically dropped at their houses. Township residents have the right to be notified that the township is looking into making changes that will negatively affect their property values and quality of life. I would like to hope that somewhere in the future that the residents are notified that these changes are being made to the student rentals in their area. It used to be if someone applied for a student rental license or a change was being done in our neighborhood within 1,000 feet, the residents were being notified. I think that the residents deserve that. Been a resident all my life. I have 20 years of experience living next to Villanova students. I'm speaking from firsthand experience, not from money-making, rosy glasses, fantasy side of the situation. Over these 20 years, I've yet to hear one single example of anything positive that's come from the Villanova students living in our neighborhoods. and certainly nothing that could ever come close in comparison to all the negative that they bring to our neighborhoods. The decreased property values, decreased quality of life, and demoralizing our children and causing them to have low self-esteem. I believe we're here tonight because Villanova University is in the process of destroying middle-class towns for Villanova's own financial gain. It's been going on for far too long, and each year it gets worse. It's Villanova who creates this student housing market from which greedy landlords seek to profit. Don't get me wrong. I see no problem in a business decision, I'm nervous, to make money separating these students from their money. I understand the concept. But destroying towns in the process would make this disgusting to most. But that's something with which these property owners will need to make their own peace. Property owners could just as easily be renting to families instead. We were once parishioners of St. Thomas of Villanova till several years ago when we awoke to 2 students on our property after 1 in the morning, asking to talk to my husband. These students had been drinking. When my husband went outside, he was encircled by approximately 12 male students. They had been under the impression that we had reported them for a party. The fact of the matter is, if they were breaking the law, it doesn't matter who reported them, they were breaking the law. We were very lucky that our police department responded promptly. After this incident, then Commissioner Dave Cannon sought a response from Villanova several times, but Villanova never responded. So we changed our parish. Often when we had gone to their church, we were asked, how are we a steward to the church? Well, I'd like to know, how is Villanova a steward to the community? And I don't mean the meager bones that they toss at us when they offer us to use their facilities. It's just a slap in the face. They need to stop this market that they've created for housing Villanova students. They need to stop destroying our neighborhoods. First, Villanova lied and told people that the reason they don't provide housing for students is to give them experience in living in the neighborhoods. That's the last thing these students want. Does Villanova really think that Radnor and Lower Merion residents are so stupid? I'm insulted. They said that they don't have the money to house students. Again, does Villanova really think the people of Radnor and Lower Merion are that stupid? Again, I'm insulted. Everyone knows Villanova and the Catholic Church have plenty of money. Villanova University is and has been forcing its senior students to live among our communities, and they're destroying them. Villanova appears to have no concern over the destruction of our small middle-class communities. Their only interest appears to be in collecting the students' tuition. Each year, they force more and more students into our communities. Each year, they put a greater burden on our towns, and we have to endure more indiscretions. How is Villanova a student to our community? Officer Ruddy once said that the neighborhoods aren't what they used to be, that children should no longer be playing in the cul-de-sacs or in our streets. What's changed in our neighborhoods is the increase in the number of Villanova students. It's not the families that drive erratically or drunk. It's the Villanova students that endanger our children. It's the Villanova students that make our children unsafe. Villanova students appear to believe that because they write a check to Villanova, they own our towns, and they have no problems breaking our laws and ordinances. Just to give you a small sample of what we experienced over the years, as these students have total disregard for our local ordinances and laws. Trash put in public areas, trash on our streets, trash in our yards, property stolen, property damaged, intimidation, disrespect of our elderly residents, urinating in public areas, urinating on private properties, excessive noise, drinking and driving, drinking while walking through the neighborhoods, public drunkenness, loud parties with vulgar language, living in rental houses in excessive numbers, sharing information through their college paper on how to break our laws, illegally parking on our streets, speeding up and down our streets, parking any which way they choose, sticking out of driveways, sticking out from the curb, parking on lawns, no care for the look of the front of the house, trash cans left out, indoor furniture on porches, keg parties in front yards, a general lack of concern for the neighbors, families, and children in our neighborhoods. These aren't one-time incidences. These are items that we are experience on a daily basis. These are certainly not Catholic or Christian behaviors, and every year it gets worse. We actually had a law student ask us, why can't we have 3 students in our unit? The girls up the street have too many in their unit. If If someone is breaking the law, is that then the precedence for someone else too? What steps does Villanova take when our laws and ordinances are broken by their students? As far as I know, none. So how is Villanova a steward to our community? Further showing that the university could care less about our communities, they don't even keep a local address of their students. This seems unbelievable to me, considering the horrible college and university incidents that have been occurring recently. In this day and age, I would think that this is a security risk for our communities and even for the university itself. If something were to happen, how would Villanova account for the location of its students? How is Villanova a steward to the community? This is a security risk that needs to be addressed by Radnor and Lower Merion Townships. It's been a number of years that the rental housing has been no more than 2 students. Since the ordinance was passed for no more than 2 students, I am unaware of any legal challenge to it. So why would the township suddenly suggest a change from 2 to 3? There's no reason for the change. There's only significant reasons not to change this. Of course, the one most obvious and important reasons not to change from 2 to 3 is to keep residents' properties from being devalued. In this current economy, the last thing Radnor Township residents need is their home being devalued by this decision. Another most important reason not to make this change is because it would further negatively affect the quality of life of Radnor Township residents. Behavior of the students are deplorable, and to increase the number of them, even by 1, increases the traffic and additional problems by 50%. Just as important as the financial losses that Radnor residents would experience, there are psychological negative impacts that our children are victim to: demoralization and loss of self-esteem. The destruction of our neighborhoods has terrible impact on our children's mental and physical well-being. 2 students already create enough destruction to our neighborhoods. It's obscene to suggest adding to that. The township is responsible to the residents, to the people of Radnor Township, not to Villanova University. It's not Radnor's responsibility to help create housing for Villanova University's students. They are a private institution. It's Villanova University's responsibility to house their students. At a meeting recently, a former student had said that the ordinance should be changed because students break it anyway. That's obscene. Just because people break the law doesn't mean that the law should be changed. The law needs to be enforced. On a road with a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit, cars drive up to 35. Because the cars drive 35, does it mean the limit should now be changed to 35? No. And why not? We all know why not. Because if you change it to 35, they're going to go 45. Also, the thought that 3 students should be allowed because houses have bedrooms, I don't want to encourage any further residential housing to be changed to student rental. Why would we want to encourage the destruction of our neighborhoods? I would even go so far as to limit the number of student rental licenses each year to the number currently on record, that no further allowances be made. Villanova needs to step up and take responsibility for their own students. Villanova needs to stop the destruction of our neighborhoods. Villanova needs to stop this housing market of its students. Villanova needs to become a steward to the community and house their own students. Villanova is tax-exempt private institution. Radnor Township needs to be responsible and do what's best for its residents, the people of Radnor. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Can you tell me, ma'am, where do you live on County Line?
On Callahan Avenue?
Where? County Line?
Callahan. We're across from the Rosemont Business Campus.
Across
We're one of the streets that have 3 houses in a row, and the middle house was questionable on how it had a license.
But tell me again, I'm still not picturing where you live.
Callahan. Across from the Rosemont Business Campus in Garrett Hill.
Oh, okay, all right, yep, sorry.
That's okay. Thank you.
Colleen Price again, from 352 Shimoni Road. I think that was a pretty incredible testimony, but we all know what happens with student housing. I don't see any reason to increase it from 2 to 3 either. When the Lower Merion statute was challenged, the number was 3 at the time. Lower Merion has 60,000 residents and 5,000 students. TE just enacted a student housing ordinance, and guess who it was in response to? Cabrini and Eastern going and renting on Mount Pleasant Avenue on the other side of St. David's Golf Club. That's the only students that they had. They went in for 3 because they just had a broad number. They probably have 100 students and I don't know how many residents. Radnor Township has 20,000 residents and over 10,000 college students. We're already almost outnumbered. They're a third of our population. Why would you possibly want to increase that population in our township? You just got a letter from the Levins. They own the Aberwick Apartments. They probably are licking their chops if they could put Eastern students and Cabrini students up there and decimate the rest of Shimoni Road. Increasing that number makes it economically viable to put more students in Radnor Township. You've only had a few houses, and they've been pretty much restricted to Garrett Hill. When you go up to 3, and you can certainly make it more profitable, you'll see the expansion through the rest of the township. It only brings down our property values and knocks your taxes down. I don't understand why we would want to increase this. We know that Villanova wants to join Big East football. They rolled out plans in 2009 to put up huge dorms, add 500 or 600 students. The Eastern University has just told you, based on what they're doing with the student union, the basketball arena, the concert hall, the Asperger Center, and the dorm, they're spending $40 million in the next 5 years. If you don't think there's a massive explosion of students coming here, then you're really not listening to what's coming before you. There will be a huge increase of students here. Don't make it any easier for them to come and live in our township and really decimate our residential neighborhoods. And that's part of what you do when you write an ordinance. The Planning Commission has the right to do whatever is rational and reasonable for their neighborhood. Lower Merion may have, only 3 unrelated. Well, they've only got, 5,000 students versus 60,000 residents. We've got 10,000 versus 20,000, and we know that number is going to jump. We may be outnumbered soon. Do not increase that number. I think it's really, really dangerous. And another point she had is, why is the impetus on the zoning officer to go count people and find out who's living there? The colleges know who they've accepted. They know how many seniors they have. Why don't they have local addresses? Why don't the colleges have to report where their students are, where they're living, and then you'll get a head count, and you'll find that there are 5 people in a house on Callan Avenue, rather than putting it up to the residents to go out there and count heads and count cars, and put it on, Matt Ballman's head for one more thing for him to have to check out. So, I would urge you not to increase it. It's been our rule since, I think, the 80s, and it's never been challenged. So I would stick with the 2 unrelated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take 2 or 3 minutes. Mary Packer again. This is kind of unusual because I was up with you a few minutes ago because I live across the street from Eastern, and I didn't like that too much, but I also happen to have a Villanova grad and one who's at school there. And I have to say to the 2 ladies that spoke, I would be irate, beyond irate. 17 houses on one street is ridiculous. So I would say maybe someone wasn't, watching the clock when all that transpired. But there are 2 points that I would bring up. One is cost. We talk about the number of kids in a house. I would ask, how big is the house? If I'm going to restrict the number, does it not have a relation to the size of the facility? But yet there's no discussion of square footage. If it has to be 2 or if it has to be 3, is it a 5,000? 1,500 square feet. Okay. Per building. Okay. 5 and 6 kids are squeezing into a house because it's expensive. So, does the township have some, wherewithal to restrict what landlords can charge? I don't know. Just a question. Oh well.
Speaking as a parent.
There we go. But they're all moving off campus because campus is too expensive. It's a lot less to live off.
Because they're dividing the rent by 5 kids.
They're not doing a family plan. They're going to the grocery store, food plan. They're going to, so they're, and nonetheless, in all of this, the slumlord lives on. I think these people need some help. Some serious help. Their neighborhood's going down the toilet, and I can't blame them for being upset. But I have to believe somewhere out there are a couple Villanova kids that aren't awful, and they're living in houses that are disgusting and shouldn't be allowed, either. So I think there's probably consideration on both sides, so I would say. And I think that maybe if we looked at the whole picture and said, these are the number of houses we have, and these are the trouble areas, perhaps that might be a starting point for kind of helping some of the people that are really rather desperate. So thank you again.
Thank you. Any other further? Okay. I actually just a follow-up 2 points with John Rice. Regarding Ms. Pillings, the expiration. Does the special exception fall under, if they were to stop using, if they got the special exception and they discontinued the use, let's say they move out in May and they were not able to re-let it for an additional year, I know our zoning code provides for, the nonconformity 1-year rule. Would there be a provision in our zoning ordinance, or could we implement a provision in our zoning ordinance that would be enforceable in that regard?
Once the use gets established, again, we could talk about nonconformities and what the law is. The 1-year expiration has been struck down by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court in other circumstances. So I wouldn't rely on that. I think what we could do, though, is it would have to be tied into this ordinance, a special provision. Have a provision that says you get your student home, and then if it's not used as a student home for a year, in order to relicense that, you've got to meet everything that's in here. So that, the use continues, but there's going to be other requirements that are going to make it more difficult to get it relicensed. That doesn't necessarily take the use away or basically abolish the nonconforming use, but that gives a relook at somebody that comes in after it's been vacant or it hasn't been rented for a year or so, and they're going to have to then comply, and maybe we bring them back for another special exception in order to meet that. I got to think about that a little bit.
Because once we grant it by special exception, it's actually granted by right.
Right.
And then uses, if you get a variance for a use, it runs with the land, and you can't. That's why. So I know. Okay, why don't we look into that further?
Yeah, variances are a little different. They actually don't create nonconformities.
Yeah.
If you get a variant, like a use variance,
then it's a
little different. But if it's a use that's nonconforming or a special exception, then you get into how can you make that go away, or how can you limit that? And that's, I think, what we're talking about doing here. So I've got a couple of thoughts on that. There's obviously some more work that's got to be done on the zoning ordinance.
Exactly. And then one follow-up to Ms. Gonzalez's comments. She discussed the notice of, I would guess, an application within the neighborhood. Since it is going under the zoning code now and under a zoning ordinance, there would be a required notice requirement to the neighborhood. So that, I believe it's the applicable notice requirement is 500, Dan, or 1,000? Did we dump it to 1,000 feet on zoning?
Well, it's 500 in R5. It's 1,000 everywhere else.
Okay, so within the R5 zoning district, all neighbors within 500, if you are R5, in the R5, all neighbors within 500 feet would be noticed that this special exception is being requested for student housing. Any other zoning district, it would automatically revert to 1,000 lineal feet, the radius that all neighbors in that would be noticed of a proposed special exception. So yes, that's another reason why it's a good thing to put this into the zoning ordinance. It's giving neighbors notice.
John, real quick, 2 things. Ms. Gonzalez asked about, can we limit the number of student housing licenses that we issue in a year? Do we have any teeth to do that?
Let me think about that.
Because it would have the double benefit of, our institutions can only grow as much as they can house their students. And to the extent that, if we just like we have a limit, or supposedly used to have a limit on liquor licenses for the health, welfare, and well-being of the township, which has now been subverted by the county, but neither here nor there. The student housing limit might.
But you're talking about, bear in mind that what you're talking about doing is singling out a use and freezing it. If that.
Well, we take a look at the health, welfare, and well-being of a township when we talk about speed limits and liquor licenses and all sorts of stuff. And
this is zoning. This is a different animal.
Okay.
Totally.
Well, second question is, when Mark just referenced about, once you get your special exception, then it's by right. What about if this was all conditional use? Is that less power, more power?
It's the same thing.
Because once you get it, then it stays your by right use.
It's a special exception that goes to the board, the governing body. Same standard. It's the same thing. It's no different other than Board of Commissioners would have to hold a hearing on every application.
All right.
I think the zoning hearing board, I think, is a little bit better suited
Okay.
for this, because there may be instances where the Township Board of Commissioners decide they want to oppose something.
Okay.
It's easier to do if it's in front of this zoning hearing board.
Well, I kind of like the idea of if there's a notion that we could have a limit to the number of these housing licenses, even if it's at the level that we have, what's going to come forward with what's already grandfathered.
It's got to be a basis to do that, other
okay.
than we would like to do it. I mean, there's got to be some study, some,
Okay.
when you do that and you start drawing those types of lines, you've got to have a basis to do that. And there's certainly, and Linda and I have talked about the issues on her street over the last year or so, and Matt and I have been dealing with it. There's definitely a basis to limit the use, but sort of a bright line, we're going to close the door at this point going forward. We'd have to look at the whole township. We'd have to look at some other issues
Okay.
in order to do that.
All righty, thanks.
Okay, with that, now we'll go to the motion to table, and I do apologize about trying to jump over public participation. There was no intent there.
So moved.
Second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Is there any old business? Any new business? I will invite for further public participation. Okay. Move to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you.